Chapter 16 of Old Rose and Silver. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Old Rose and Silver by Myrtle Reed. Chapter 16. How Isabel Came. Madame Bernard and Rose were so deeply affected by Allison's misfortune that they scarcely took note of Isabel's few bruises, greatly to that young woman's disgust. She chose to consider herself in the light of a martyr, and had calmly received the announcement that Allison's left hand would probably have to be amputated. None of them had seen him, though the two older women were ready to go. At any hour of the day or night they might be needed or asked for. Isabel affected a sprained ankle and limped badly when anyone was looking. Once or twice she had been seen to walk almost as usual, though she did not know it. The upper hall, and occasionally the other parts of the house, smelled of the various liniments and lotions with which she anointed herself. She scorned the suggestion that she should stay in bed, for she was quite comfortable upon a couch, in her most becoming negligee, with a novel and a box of chocolates to bear her company. At first she had taken her meals in her own room, but finding that it was more pleasant to be downstairs with the others for luncheon and dinner, managed to go up and down the long flight of stairs twice each day. Placid as she was, the table was not a cheerful place, for the faces of the other two were haggard and drawn, and neither made more than a pretence of eating. Daily bulletins came from the other house as to Allison's condition, and Madame was in constant communication by telegraph with Colonel Kent. She kept him reassured as much as possible, and did not tell him of Allison's ineradicable delusion that his father was dead. Allison's note was given to Isabel at luncheon the day after it was written, having been delayed in delivery the night before until after she was asleep. With it was a letter from her mother, which had come in the noon mail. She opened Allison's note first, read it, and put it back into the envelope. Her mother's letter was almost equally brief. That, too, she returned to its envelope without comment. "How is your mother, Isabel?" inquired Madame, having caught a glimpse of the bold, dashing superscription which was familiar, though infrequent. "She's all right," Isabel answered, breaking open a hot muffin. "It's funny that it should come at the same time as the other." "Why?" asked Rose, merely for the sake of making conversation. "Because just as Mamma writes to tell me that marriage is slavery, but that if he can take care of me, and Aunt Francesca approves of him, it will be all right. Allison writes and releases me from the engagement." "Poor boy," sighed Madame. "I don't know why you should say 'poor boy,'" Isabel observed rather fretfully. "He's not very ill if he can write letters. I'm sure I don't feel like writing any." "I wasn't thinking of that," said Madame, half to herself. "And as for his releasing me," Isabel went on coolly, "I'm glad he was decent enough to do it and save me the trouble of releasing myself." Rose got to her feet somehow, her face deathly white. "Do you mean," she cried, "that you would think for a minute of accepting release?" "Why, certainly," the girl replied in astonishment. "Why not?" "He says himself that he can't ask me to marry a cripple." Rose winced visibly. "Isabel!" she breathed. "Oh, Isabel!" "My dear," said Madame, with such kindness as she could muster, "have you forgotten that he saved you from death or worse? He didn't do anything for me but to tell me to jump. I did more for him than that. Nobody seems to think it was anything for me to get up out of the dust with my best white dress all ruined, and my face scratched, and my ankle sprained, and one arm bleeding, and help the Crosbys carry a heavy man to their machine and lay him on the back seat." "I thought the Crosbys carried him," put in Madame. "They're strong enough to do it, I should think." "Well, I helped. I had to take all the nasty raw meat out of the back seat and throw it out in the ditch to the dogs, and stand up all the way home, bruised as I was, to keep him from falling off the seat. We were in a perfect bedlam there for a while, but it doesn't seem to make any difference to anybody. Nobody cares what happens to me. Besides," she went on, with her voice raised to a high pitch by excitement, "I don't see why I should be expected to marry a man with only one hand. He can't play any more, and if he can't play, how can he make any money to take care of me, even if I should tie myself to him for life? Do you expect me to take in washing and take care of him?" "Isabel," said Madame coldly, please stop talking so loudly, and please listen for a moment. Nobody expects you to marry a man whom, for any reason on earth, you do not love well enough to marry. Kindly consider that as something to be settled in accordance with your own wishes and desires." "Certainly," interrupted the girl. "I'd like to see anybody force me to marry him." Madame compressed her lips into a thin, tight line, and her face became stern, even hard. She clenched her small hands tightly, and her breath came quickly. A red spot burned on either cheek. Never having seen Madame angry before, Rose was almost frightened. She herself was not angry, but hurt for him. At the moment she heard of the accident, her love for him had transcended the bounds of self and merged into prayer for him and for his good, whatever that might prove to be. "Isabel," said Rose very softly, "will you do one thing for me?" "What?" Isabel demanded suspiciously. "Listen, dear, for me, if not for him. Will you go to him and, well, simply be kind? Don't let him think that this terrible thing has separated him from you or changed your love. Wait until he is strong and well again before you tell him. Will you please?" Isabel's flushed face took on the expression of outraged virtue. "I don't know why I should be expected to lie," she remarked evasively, with a subtle change of manner. Madame Bernard cleared her throat. "Your love was a lie," she said, in a tone that neither of them had ever heard her use before. "One more won't matter." Isabel fidgeted in her chair and nervously tapped the edge of her plate with her fork. "I haven't heard anybody say," she said, with the air of one scoring a fine point, "that his father doesn't love him, and yet he hasn't gone near him, hasn't even seen him since we were hurt. If Colonel Kent can stay away from him, I don't know why I can't." The argument seemed unanswerable, for neither Madame nor Rose spoke. They sat with averted eyes until the silence became oppressive, and Isabel, with ostentatious difficulty, pushed back her chair and limped painfully out of the room. When she had locked her own door, she was more at ease, and began to survey her unpleasant situation. Nobody seemed to consider her at all. It was only Allison, and everything and everybody apparently must be sacrificed for him. Just because she had promised to marry him when he had both hands, they wanted her to go on with it, in spite of the fact that he saw it was impossible. Isabel sighed heavily. Nobody knew how keenly disappointed she was. She had written to her few friends, told them about her engagement ring, the plans made for her trousseau, the promised touring car, and the brilliant social career that lay before her as the wife of a famous violinist. She pictured a triumphal tour from city to city, with the leaders of fashion everywhere vying with each other in entertaining them, or at least her. It would, of course, be necessary for Allison to play occasionally in the evening, and they would miss a great deal on that account, but her days would be free, and she could cancel all her own social obligations by complimentary tickets and suppers after the concerts. She had planned it all as she took lazy stitches in her dainty lingerie. Aunt Francesca and Rose had been helping her, but the whole thing had stopped suddenly. It seemed rather selfish of them not to go on with it, for lingerie was always useful, and even though she should not marry Allison, it was not at all improbable that she would marry someone else. If she could find anybody who had plenty of money and would be good to her, she knew that she would encounter no parental opposition, in spite of Mrs. Ross's pronounced views upon the slavery of matrimony. Allison had been very decent in releasing her from her awkward predicament. He had even arranged it so that no answer was necessary, and she need not even see him again. She had the natural shrinking of the healthy young animal from its own stricken kind. It would be much nicer not to see him again. But if he could write letters now, it would not be long before he would be able to come over, though his hand had not yet been taken off. It was too bad, for everything had been very pleasant until the accident. She had missed Allison's daily visits, and had probably lost the touring car, though, as she had taken pains to find out, it had fallen into the ditch and had been injured very little. Aunt Francesca and Rose had been queer ever since it happened. After Colonel Kent and the servants and the twins had lifted Allison out of the Yellow Peril and carried him up to his own room on an improvised stretcher, while someone else was telephoning for every doctor in the neighborhood, the twins had taken her home. She had insisted upon their helping her up the steps, and as soon as Aunt Francesca and Rose heard the news, they had paid no attention to her at all, but with one voice had demanded that the twins should take them to Kent's immediately. They had gone without even stopping for their hats, and left her wholly to the servants. Even when they had come home late at night in their own carriage, it was over half an hour before Aunt Francesca came to her room, so overburdened with selfish grief that she did not even listen to the recital of Isabel's numerous bruises. Perhaps it would be best to go away, though the city was terrible in summer, and she had only money enough to take her to the hotel where her mother retained a suite of 3 rooms. If Aunt Francesca and Rose would leave her alone in the house long enough, and she could pack a suitcase and get the carriage just in time to take her to the train, she could write a formal note and ask to have the rest of her things sent by express. If there were a late train, or one very early in the morning, she could probably manage it, even without the carriage. But on consulting the timetable, she found that trains did not run at hours suitable for escape. However, it was just as well to pack while she had time. She could keep the suitcase hidden until the auspicious moment arrived. It would only take a moment to open it and sweep her toilet articles into it from the top of her dresser. She had just taken a fresh shirt-waist out of the drawer when there was a light, determined rap at the door. When she opened it, she was much astonished to see Aunt Francesca come in dressed for a drive. "Are you almost ready, Isabel?" she asked politely. "Ready?" gasped the girl. "For what?" It seemed for the moment as though she had been anticipated in her departure and was about to be put out of the house. "To drive over to Kent's," answered Madame imperturbably. From her manner, one would have thought the drive had been long planned. Isabel sat down on her bed. "I'm not going," she said. "Oh, yes, you are," returned Madame in a small, thin voice. "You may go in your tea gown and slippers if you prefer, but I will wait until you dress, if you are quick about it." "I won't," Isabel announced flatly. "I'm sick. You know I'm all bruised up and I can't walk." "You can walk downstairs, and it's only a few steps farther to the carriage. I telephoned over to ask if he would see you, and the nurse said that he would be very glad to see you, that he had been asking all day why you did not come. The carriage is waiting at the door, so please hurry." Isabel was head and shoulders taller than the determined little lady who stood there waiting, but there was something in her manner that demanded immediate obedience. Sullenly, Isabel began to dress. If Aunt Francesca went with her, it would not be necessary to say much. She caught at the thought as though she were drowning and the proverbial straw had floated into reach. She took her time about dressing, but Madame said nothing. She simply stood there waiting in the open door until the last knot was tied, the last pin adjusted, and the last stray lock brushed into place. Isabel limped ostentatiously all the way downstairs and had to be assisted into the carriage. During the brief drive, neither spoke. The silence was unbroken until they reached the door of Allison's room. Then Madame said in a low tone, "The carriage will call for you in an hour. Remember he loves you, and be kind." Up to that moment, Isabel had not suspected that she would be obliged to see him alone. She was furious with Aunt Francesca for thus betraying her. But no retreat was possible. The nurse smilingly ushered her in, passed her almost on the threshold, and went out, quietly closing the door. Allison, as eager as a boy of 20, had half risen in bed. The injured hand was hidden by the sheet, but the other was outstretched in welcome. "Isabel," he breathed. "My Isabel." Isabel did not move. "How do you do?" she said primly. "I'm sorry I can't get you a chair, dear. Come close, won't you?" Isabel limped painfully to the chair that was farthest from him, dragged it over to the bed, and sat down, just out of his reach. Below, the rumble of wheels announced that Madame had gone back home. Unless she walked, Isabel was stranded at Kent's for a full hour. "My note," Allison was saying. "You got it, didn't you?" "Yes, it came while I was at luncheon today." It flashed upon him for an instant that the reality was disappointing, that this was not all as he had dreamed it would be, but pride bade him conceal his disappointment as best he could. "You were hurt," he said tenderly. "I'm so sorry." "Yes, I was hurt quite a good deal." "But you're all right now, and I'm so glad." "Thank you," she answered listlessly. Her eyes roved about the room, observing every detail of furniture and ornament. It was old-fashioned, and in a way queer, she thought. She was glad that she would never have to live there. Allison watched her eagerly, like a wayfarer in the desert thirsting for water. He longed for her tenderness, for one unsought kiss, even in farewell. His pride sustained him no longer. "Dear," he pleaded, like the veriest beggar, "won't you kiss me just once?" Isabel hesitated. "It isn't proper," she murmured, "now that we are no longer engaged. I'm sorry you got hurt," she added, as an afterthought. Allison's face paled suddenly. So she accepted her release. Then eager justification of her made him wonder if, by any chance, she could have misunderstood. "Dearest," he said with cold lips, "did you think for a single instant that I wanted to release you? I did it because it was the only thing an honorable man could do, and I wouldn't let pity for me hold you to a promise made in love. It wasn't that I didn't want you. I've wanted you every day and every hour. Only God knows how I've wanted you, and shall want you all the rest of my life, unless—" He paused, hoping for the space of a heartbeat, that the dream might come true. But Isabel did not move from her chair. She surveyed the opposite wall for a few moments before she spoke. "It was honorable," she said in a more friendly tone. "Of course it was the only thing you could do." "Of course," he echoed bitterly. Isabel rose, went to the foot of the bed, and leaned upon it, facing him. "I'm afraid I've stayed too long," she said. "I think I'd better go. I can wait downstairs for the carriage." Allison did not answer. His eyes burned strangely in his white face, making her vaguely uncomfortable and afraid. She turned the diamond ring upon her finger and slowly slipped it off. "I suppose I must give this back," she said reluctantly. "I mustn't wear it now." "Why not?" he asked huskily. "Because it doesn't mean anything now." "It never did. Keep it, Isabel." "Thank you," she said calmly, putting it back, but on the middle finger. "I must go now. I hope you'll get along all right. Wait just a minute, please." He rang a bell that was on a table within his reach, and the nurse came in. "Please bring me my violin." Isabel turned to the door, but was held back by a peremptory command. "Wait! Here!" he cried shrilly, offering Isabel the violin. "Take this, too." "What for?" she asked curiously. "I can't play." "Nevertheless, it belongs to you. Keep it as a souvenir." Holding the violin awkwardly, Isabel backed out of the room, the nurse following her and closing the door. The nurse was a young woman who had not sacrificed her normal human sympathy to her chosen work, but had managed, happily, to combine the two. She watched Isabel disdainfully as she went downstairs, very briskly for one with a sprained ankle. "God," said Allison aloud. "Oh, God in heaven." Then the nurse turned away in pity, for behind the closed door she heard a grown man sobbing like a hurt child. End of chapter 16. Chapter 17 of Old Rose and Silver. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Old Rose and Silver by Myrtle Reed. Chapter 17. Penance. The Crosby twins had gone home very quietly after doing all they could to help Colonel Kent and Madame Bernard. The Yellow Peril chugged along at the lowest speed, with all its gaudy banners torn down. Neither spoke until they passed the spot where the red touring car lay on its side in the ditch, and 4 or 5 dogs, still hungry and hopeful, wrangled over a few bare bones. Juliet was sniffing audibly, and as soon as she saw the wreck, burst into tears. "Oh, Romy," she sobbed, "if he's dead, we've killed him." Romeo swallowed a lump in his throat, winked hard, and roughly advised Juliet to shut up. When the machine was safely in the barn, and all the scattered dogs collected and imprisoned, Romeo came in, ready to talk it over. "We've got to do something," he said, "but I don't know what it is." "Oh, Romy," cried Juliet, with a fresh burst of tears, "do you think they'll hang us? We're murderers." Romeo considered for a moment before he answered. "We aren't murderers, because we didn't go to do it. They won't hang us. But they ought to," he added remorsefully. "What can we do?" mourned Juliet. "Oh, what can we do?" "Well, we can pay all the bills for one thing. That's a good start. Tomorrow, I'll see about getting that car out of the ditch and taking care of it." "Somebody may steal it," she suggested. "Not if we guard it. One or both of us ought to sit by it until we can get it into the barn." Juliet wiped her eyes. "That's right. We'll guard it all tonight, and while we're guarding it, we'll talk it over and decide what to do." The dinner of unwholesome delicacies, which they had planned as the last feature of the day's celebration, was hesitatingly renounced. "We don't deserve to have anything at all to eat," said Juliet. "What is it that they feed prisoners on? Bread and water? Black bread? Where could we get black bread? I don't know. I never saw any." After discussing a penitential menu for some time, they finally decided to live upon mush and milk for the present, and, if Allison should die, forever. "We can warm it in the winter," said Romeo, "and it won't be so bad." When their frugal repast was finished, they instinctively changed their festal garments for the sober attire of every day. Romeo brought in 2 lanterns, and Juliet pasted red tissue paper around them so that they might serve as warning signals of the wreck. At sunset, they set forth, each with a blanket and a lantern, to do sentry duty by the capsized car. "Oughtn't we to have a dog or two?" queried Romeo as they trudged down the road. "Watchmen always have dogs." "We oughtn't to have anything that would make it any easier for us to watch, and besides, the dogs weren't to blame. They don't need to sit up with us. Let 'em have their sleep." "All right," Romeo grunted. "Shall we divide the night into watches, and one of us sit on the car while the other walks?" "No, we'll watch together, and we won't sit on the car. We'll sit on the cold, damp ground. If we take cold and die, it will only serve us right." "We can't take cold in June," objected Romeo, "with 2 blankets." "Unless it rains." "It won't rain tonight," he said gloomily. "Look at the stars." The sky was clear, and pale stars shone faintly in the afterglow. There was not even a light breeze. The world was as still and calm as though pain and death were unknown. When they reached the scene of the accident, Romeo set the 2 red lanterns at the point where the back of the car touched the road. They spread one blanket on the grass at the other side of the road and sat down to begin their long vigil. Romeo planned to go home to breakfast at sunrise and bring Juliet some of the mush and milk left from supper. Then, while she continued to watch the machine, he would go into town and make arrangements for its removal. "Is there room in our barn for both cars?" she asked. "No, ours will have to come out." Juliet shuddered. "I never want to see it again." "Neither do I." "Can we sell it?" "We ought not to sell it unless we gave him the money. We shouldn't have it ourselves." "Then," suggested Juliet, "why don't we give it away and give him just as much as it cost, including our suits and the dogs' collars and everything? We have no right to give away a man-killer. The Yellow Peril is cursed." "Let's sacrifice it!" she cried. "Let's make a funeral pyre in the yard and burn it. And our suits and the dogs' collars and everything. Let's burn everything we've got that we care for." "All right," agreed Romeo, uplifted by the zeal of the true martyr. "And," he added regretfully, "I'll shoot all the dogs and bury 'em in one long trench. I don't want to see anything again that was in it." "I don't either," returned Juliet. She wondered whether she should permit the wholesale execution of the herd, since it was a thing she had secretly desired for a long time. "You mustn't shoot Minerva and the puppies," she continued, as her strict sense of justice asserted itself, "because she wasn't in it. She was at home, taking care of her children, and they'd die if she should be shot now." So it was settled that Minerva, who had taken no part in the fatal celebration, should be spared, with her innocent babes. "And in a few more years," said Romeo hopefully, "we'll have lots more dogs, though probably not as many as we've got now." Juliet sighed heavily, but was in honor bound to make no objections, for long ago, when they arbitrated the dog question, it was written in the covenant that no dog should be imported, or none killed, except by mutual consent. And Minerva had 5 puppies, and if each of the 5 should follow the maternal example, and if each of those should do likewise, Juliet fairly lost her head in a maze of mental arithmetic. "We ought to go into deep mourning," Romeo was saying. "I've been thinking of that. We should repent in sackcloth and ashes, only I don't know what sackcloth is." "I guess it's that rough brown stuff they make potato bags of." "Burlap?" "Yes, but we haven't many ashes at this time of year, and we'll have still less if we live on mush and milk." "Maybe we could get ashes somewhere," she said thoughtfully. "We'd have to, because it would take us over a year to get enough to repent in. There'll be ashes left from the automobile and the suits, and if you can get enough potato bags, I'll fix 'em so we can wear 'em at the sacrifice, and afterwards we can buy deep mourning." "All right, but you mustn't make pretty suits." "I couldn't out of potato bags. They'll have to be plain, very plain. The first thing is to get this car into our barn, and write and tell Colonel Kent where it is. Then we'll get our black clothes, and then we'll shoot the dogs and bury 'em, and then we'll have the sacrifice, and then—" "And then?" repeated Juliet. "Then we'll have to go and tell 'em all what we've done, and offer to pay all the bills, and give 'em the price of the car, besides for damages." "Oh, Romie," cried Juliet with a shudder. "We don't have to go and tell 'em, do we? We don't have to take strangers into our consciences, do we?" "Certainly," replied Romeo sternly. "Just because we don't want to do it is why we've got to do it. We've got to do hard things when we make a sacrifice. Lots of people think they're charitable if they give away their old clothes and things they don't want. It isn't charity to give away things you want to get rid of, and it isn't a sacrifice to do things you don't mind doing. The harder it is, and the more we don't want to do it, the better sacrifice." His logic was convincing, but Juliet drooped visibly. The bent little figure on the blanket was pathetic, but the twins were not given to self-pity. As time went on, the conversation lagged. They had both had a hard day, from more than one standpoint, and it was not surprising that by midnight the self-appointed sentries were sound asleep upon one blanket, with Romeo's coat for a pillow and the other blanket tucked around them. The red lanterns burned faithfully until almost dawn, then smoked and went out, leaving an unpleasant odor that lasted until sunrise. The rumble of a distant cart woke them, and they sat up, shamefacedly rubbing their eyes. "Oh," cried Juliet, conscience-stricken. "We went to sleep. We went to sleep on duty. How could we?" "Dunno," returned Romeo with a frank yawn. "Guess we were tired. Anyhow, the machine is all right." When the milkman came in sight, they hailed him and purchased a quart of milk. He was scarcely surprised to see them, for the Crosbys were widely known to be eccentric, and presently he drove on. His query about the wrecked car had passed unnoticed. "If you'll stay here, Jule," said Romeo, wiping his mouth, "I'll go and get a team and some rope, and we'll get the car in." "Can't I go too?" "No, you stay here. It's bad enough to sleep at your post without deserting it." "You slept too," retorted Juliet, quickly on the defensive, "and I'm a girl." "Huh!" he sneered. The claim of feminine privilege invariably disgusted him beyond words. "Suppose people come by," Juliet faltered, "and ask questions." "Answer 'em," advised Romeo briefly. "Tell 'em we've killed a man and are going to suffer for it. We deserve to have everybody know it." But fortunately for Juliet's quicker sensibilities, no one passed by in the hour Romeo was gone. He came from the nearest farm, with an adequate number of assistants and such primitive machinery as was at hand. The car was not badly damaged, and was finally towed into the Crosbys' barn. Then they went into the house and composed a letter to Colonel Kent, but put off copying and sending it until they should be able to get black-bordered stationery. 2 weeks later, clad in deepest mourning, the twins trudged into town. At Colonel Kent's there was no one in authority to receive them, and their errand was of too much importance to be communicated to either physician or nurse. Their own unopened letter lay on the library table with many others. Subdued and chastened in demeanor, they went to Madame Bernard's and waited in funereal silence until Madame came down. "How do you—" she began, then stopped. "Why, what is the matter?" "We ran over him," explained Romeo, suggestively inclining his head in the general direction of Kent's. "Don't you remember?" "And if he dies, we've killed him," put in Juliet sadly. "We'll be murderers if he dies," Romeo continued, "and we ought to be hung." In spite of her own depression and deep anxiety, Madame saw how keenly the tragedy had affected the twins. "Why, my dears," she cried, "do you think for a minute that anybody in the world blames you?" "We ought to be blamed," Romeo returned, "because we did it." "But not on purpose. You couldn't help it." "We could have helped it," said Juliet, "by not celebrating. We had no business to buy an automobile, or even if we had, we shouldn't have gone out in it until we learned to run it." "That's like staying away from the water until you have learned to swim," answered Madame, comfortingly. "And Allison isn't going to die." "Really? Do you mean it? Are you sure? How do you know?" The words came all at once, in a jumble of eager questions. "Because he isn't. The worst that could possibly happen to him would be the loss of his left hand, and his father is looking all over the country for some surgeon who can save it." "I'd rather die than to have my hand cut off," said Juliet in a small, thin voice. "So would I," added Romeo. "We're all hoping for the best," Madame went on, "and you must hope, too. Nobody has thought of blaming you, so you mustn't feel so badly about it. Even Allison himself wouldn't want you to feel badly." "But we do," Romeo answered, "in spite of all the sacrifices and everything." "Sacrifices?" repeated Madame, wonderingly. "Why, what do you mean?" "We did sentry duty all night by his car," Romeo explained, "and we're taking care of it in our barn." "And we've lived on mush and milk ever since," Juliet added. "I shot all the dogs but the one with the puppies," said Romeo. "She wasn't in it, you know," Juliet continued. "I helped dig the trench, and we buried the whole 19 end to end by the fence, with their new collars on." "Then we burned the automobile," resumed Romeo. "We soaked it in kerosene and put our suits into the back seat, our caps and goggles and everything. We took out all the pieces of iron and steel and gave 'em to the junk man, and then we repented in sackcloth and ashes." "How so?" queried Madame, with a faint glimmer of amusement in her sad eyes. "Juliet made suits out of potato sacks, very plain suits, and we put 'em on to repent in." "We went and stood in the ashes," put in Juliet, "while they were so hot that they hurt our feet, and Romie raised his right hand and said, 'I repent,' and then I did the same. And after the ashes got cold, we sat down in 'em and rubbed 'em into our sackcloth and our hair and all over our faces and hands." "All the time saying, 'I repent, I repent,'" continued Juliet soberly. "And then we went into mourning," concluded Romeo. Madame's heart throbbed with tender pity for the stricken twins, but she wisely said nothing. "Can you think of anything more we could do, or any more sacrifices we could make?" inquired Juliet, ready to atone in full measure. "Indeed I can't," replied Madame truthfully. "I think you've done everything that could be expected of you." "We wrote to the Colonel," said Romeo, "but he hasn't got it yet. We saw it on the library table. We want to pay all the bills." "And give Allison as much money as we spent on the automobile, and for the suits and everything, and pay for fixing up his car," interrupted Juliet. "We want to do everything," Romeo said with marked emphasis. "Everything," echoed Juliet. "That's very nice of you," answered Madame kindly, "and we all appreciate it." The stem young faces of the twins relaxed ever so little. It was a great relief to discover that they were not objects of scorn and loathing, for they had brooded over the accident until they had become morbid. "Did you say that you had been living upon mush and milk ever since?" asked Madame. "Ever since," they answered together. "I'm sure that's long enough," she said. "I wouldn't do it any longer. Won't you stay to dinner with us?" With one accord, the twins rose, impelled by a single impulse toward departure. "We couldn't," said Romeo. "We mustn't," explained Juliet. Then, with belated courtesy, she added, "Thank you just the same." They made their adieus awkwardly and went home, greatly eased in mind. As they trudged along the dusty road, they occasionally sighed in relief, but said little until they reached their ancestral abode, dogless now save for the pups gambolling about the doorstep and Minerva watching them with maternal pride. "She said we lived on mush and milk long enough," said Romeo pensively. "We might fry the mush," Juliet suggested, "and have butter and maple syrup on it." "Maybe." "And drink the milk, and have bread, too?" "I guess so." "And jam?" "Not while we're in mourning," said Juliet firmly. "We can have syrup on our bread." "That's just as good." "If you think so, you ought not to have it." "We've got to feed ourselves or we'll die," he objected vigorously. "And if we're dead, we won't be any good to him or to anybody else, and we can't ever repent any more." "I'm not so sure about that," said Juliet, with sinister emphasis. "Nothing will happen to us that we don't deserve," Romeo assured her, "so come on and let's have jam. If it makes us sick, it's wrong, and if it doesn't, it's all right." The following day they voluntarily returned to their mush and milk, for they had eaten too much jam, and having been very ill in the night, considered it sufficient evidence that their penance was not yet over. End of chapter 17. Chapter 18 of Old Rose and Silver. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Old Rose and Silver by Myrtle Reed. Chapter 18. Less Than Dust. The heat of August shimmered over the land, and still to every inquiry at the door or telephone, the quiet young woman in blue and white said, "No change." Allison was listless and apathetic, yet comparatively free from pain. Life, for him, had ebbed back to the point where the tide must either cease or turn. He knew neither hunger nor thirst nor weariness, only the great pause of soul and body, the sense of the ultimate goal. One by one, he meditated upon the things he used to care for. Isabel came first, but her youth and beauty had ceased to trouble or to beckon. His father had gone on ahead. The delusion still persisted, but he spoke of it no more. Even the violin did not matter now. He remembered the endless hours he had spent at work, almost every day of his life for years, and to what end? In an instant it had been rendered empty, purposeless, and vain, like life itself. Occasionally a new man came to look at his hand, not from the city now, but from towns farther inland. The examinations were painful, of course, but he made no objections. After the man had gone, he could count the slow, distinct pulsations that marked the ebbing of the pain, but never troubled him to ask either the doctor or the nurse what the new man had said about it. He no longer cared. Aunt Francesca had not come, nor Rose. Perhaps they were dead also. He asked the nurse, one sultry afternoon, if they were dead. "No," he assured him, "nobody is dead." He wondered, fretfully, why she should take the trouble to lie to him so persistently upon this one point. Then a cunning scheme came into his mind. It presented itself mechanically to him as a trap for the nurse. If they were dead, she could not produce them instantly alive, as a conjurer takes animals from an apparently empty box. If he demanded that she should bring them to him, or even one, it would prove his point, and let her see that he knew how she was trying to deceive him. "Have they gone away?" he inquired. "No, they're still there." "Then," said Allison, with the air of one scoring a fine point, "will you ask Miss Bernard to come over and see me." Remembering the other woman, who had come in response to his request, and the disastrous effect the visit had had upon her patient, she hesitated. "I'm afraid you're not strong enough," she said kindly. "Can't you wait a little longer?" "There!" he cried. "I knew they were dead." As she happened to be both wise and kind, the young woman hesitated no longer. "If I brought you a note from her, you would believe me, wouldn't you?" "No," he replied stubbornly. "Isn't there any way you would know, without seeing her?" He considered for a few moments. "I'd know if I heard her play," he said at length. "There's no one who could play just the way she does. Suppose I ask her to come over sometimes and play the piano downstairs for a few minutes at a time, very softly. Would you like that?" "Yes, that is, I don't mind." He was sure now that his trap was in working order, for no one could deceive him at the piano. He would recognize Rose at the first chord. "Excuse me just a minute, please." She returned presently with the news that Rose would come as soon as she could. "Can't you go to sleep now?" she suggested. Allison smiled ironically. How transparent she was! She wanted him to go to sleep, and when he awoke, she would tell him that Rose had been there, and had played, and had just gone. "No," he answered, "I don't want to go to sleep. I want to hear Rose play." So he waited, persistently, wide awake, sharpened by illness and pain. His hearing was phenomenally acute, so much so that even a whisper in the next room was distinctly audible. He heard the distant rumble of wheels approaching steadily, and wondered why the house did not tremble when the carriage stopped. He heard the lower door open softly, then close, a quick, light step in the living room, the old-fashioned piano stool whirling on its rusty axis, then a few slow, deep chords prefacing a familiar bit of Chopin. He turned to the nurse who sat in her low rocking chair at the window. "I beg your pardon. I thought you were not telling me the truth." The young woman only smiled in answer. "Listen." From downstairs the music came softly. Rose was playing with the exquisite taste and feeling that characterized everything she did. She purposely avoided the extremes of despair and joy, keeping to the safe middle ground. Living waters murmured through the melody. The sea surged and crooned. Flying clouds went through blue, sunny spaces, and birds sang, ever with an unfailing uplift as of many wings. Allison's calmness insensibly changed, not in degree, but in quality, as the piano magically brought before him green distances lying fair beneath the warm sun, clover-scented meadows and blossoming boughs. "Life," he said to himself, "life more abundant." She drifted from one thing to another, playing snatches of old songs, woven together by modulations of her own making. At last she paused to think of something else, but her fingers remembered, and began almost of their own accord. Allison stirred restlessly as he recalled how he had heard it before. He saw the drifted petals of fallen roses, the moon shadow on the dial, hours wrong, the spangled cobwebs in the grass, and the other spangles, changed to faint iridescence in the enchanted light as Isabel came toward him and into his open arms. Could marble respond to a lover's passion? Could dead lips answer with love for love? Then Isabel might have yielded to him at least a tolerant tenderness. He saw her now, alien and apart, like some pale star that shone upon a barren wasteland, but never for him. Another phrase, full of love and longing, floated up the stairway and entered his room, a guest unbidden. He turned to the nurse. "Ask Miss Bernard to come up for a few minutes, will you?" "Do you think it wise?" she temporized. "Please ask her to come up," he said, imperatively. "Must I call her myself?" So Rose came up, after receiving the customary caution not to stay too long and avoid everything that might be unpleasant or exciting. She stood for a moment in the doorway, hesitating. Her face was almost as white as her linen gown, but her eyes were shining with strange fires. "White Rose," he said wearily, "I have been through hell." "I know," she answered softly, drawing up a chair beside him. "Aunt Francesca and I have wished that we might divide it with you and help you bear it." He stretched a trembling hand toward her, and she took it in both her own. They were soft and cool and soothing. "Thank you for wanting to share it," he said. "Thank you for coming, for playing, for everything. Either of us would have come whenever you wanted us, night or day." "Suppose it was night, and I'd wanted you to come and play to me. Would you have come?" "Why, yes. Of course I would." "I didn't know," he stammered, "that there was so much kindness in the world. I have been very lonely since." Her eyes filled, and she held his hand more closely. "You won't be lonely any more. I'll come whenever you want me, night or day, to play, to read, or anything. Only speak and I'll come." "How good you are," he murmured gratefully. "No, please don't let go of my hand." In some inexplicable fashion, strength seemed to flow to him from her. "I think you'll be glad to know," she said, "how sympathetic everybody has been. Strangers stop us on the street to ask for you, and people telephone every day. Down in the library there's a pile of letters that would take days to read, and many of them have foreign stamps. It makes one feel warm around the heart, for it brings the ideal of human brotherhood so near." He sighed, and his face looked haggard. The brotherhood of man was among the things that did not concern him now. The weariness of the ages was in every line of his body. "I have been thinking," he went on, after a little, "what a difference one little hour can make, a minute even. Once I had everything, youth, health, strength, a happy home, love, a dear father, and every promise of success in my chosen career. Now I'm old and broken. Health, strength, and love have been taken away in an instant. My father is gone, and my career is only an empty memory. I have no violin, and if I had, what use would it be to me without? Why, Rose, I haven't even fingers to make the notes, nor hands to hold it." Rose could bear no more. She sprang to her feet with arms outstretched, all her love and longing swelling into infinite appeal. "Oh, boy," she cried, take mine. Take my hands for always." For a tense instant they faced each other. Her breast rose and fell with every quick breath. Her eyes met his, then faltered, and the crimson of shame mantled her white face. "Oh," she breathed painfully, and turned away from him. When she was halfway to the door, he called to her. "Rose, dear Rose." She hesitated, her hand upon the knob. "Close the door and come back," he pleaded. "Please, oh, please." Trembling from head to foot, she obeyed him, but her face was pitiful. She could not force herself to look at him. "Forgive," she murmured, "and forget." The hand he took in his was cold, but her nearness gave him comfort, as never before. His heart was unspeakably tender toward her. "Rose," he went on softly, "I've been too near the other world not to have the truth now. Tell me what you mean. Make me understand." She did not answer, nor even lift her eyes. She breathed hard, as though she were in pain. "Rose," he said again, tightening his clasp upon the hand she tried to draw away, "did you mean that you would be my—" "In name," she interrupted, throwing up her head proudly. "Just to help you, that was all." He drew her hand to his hot lips and kissed it twice. "Oh, how divinely kind you are," he whispered, "even to think of stooping to such as I." "Have pity," she said brokenly, "and let me go." "Pity?" he repeated. "In all the world there is none like yours. To think of your being willing to sacrifice yourself through pity of me." The blood came back into her heart by leaps and bounds. She had not utterly betrayed herself, then, since he translated it thus. "Listen," he was saying. "I cared terribly, but it's gone, and my heart is empty. It's like an open grave, waiting for something that does not come. Did you ever care?" "Yes," she answered, with eyes downcast. "Did you care for someone who did not care for you?" "Yes," she replied again. "And he never knew?" "No." The word was almost a whisper. "He must have been a brute not to have cared. Was it long ago?" "Not very." "Have I ever met him?" The suggestion of an ironical smile hovered for a moment around her pale lips, then vanished. "No." "I have no right to ask his name." "No. What difference does a name make?" "None. Could you never bring yourself to care for anyone else?" "No," she breathed. "Oh, no." "And yet, with your heart as empty as mine, you still have pity enough to—" "To serve you," she answered. Her eyes met his clearly now. "To help you, as your best friend might." "Rose, dear Rose,
You give me new courage, but how can I let you sacrifice yourself for me?" "Believe me," she said diffidently, "there is no question of sacrifice. Have you never thought of what you might do that would be even better than the career you had planned?" "Why, no. What could I do without—" "Write," she said with her eyes shining. "Let others play what you write. Immortality comes by way of the printed page." "I couldn't," he returned doubtfully. "I never composed anything except 2 or 3 little things that I never dared to play, even for encores." "Never say you can't. Say I must and I will." "You're saying them for me. You almost make me believe in myself." "That's the very best of beginnings, isn't it?" She was quite calm now, outwardly, and she drew her hand away. Allison remembered the long, happy hours they had spent together before Isabel came into his life. Now that she was gone, the old comradeship had returned, the sweeter because of long absence. Rose had never fretted nor annoyed him. She seemed always to understand. "You don't know how glad I'd be," he sighed, "to feel that I wasn't quite out of it, that there was something in life for me still. I didn't want to be a bit of driftwood on the current of things." "You're not going to be. I won't let you. Haven't you learned that sometimes we have to wait, that we can't always be going on? Just moor your soul at the landing place, and when the hour comes you'll swing out into the current again. Much of the driftwood is only craft that broke away from the landing." He smiled, for her fancy pleased him. An abiding sense of companionship crept into his loneliness. His isolation seemed to be shared. "And you'll stay at the landing with me," he whispered, "until the time comes to set sail again." "Yes. And after the worst that can come is over, we'll make it right with the world and go abroad together." "Yes." Her voice was very low now. "And we'll be the best of friends for always." "Yes, the best of friends in all the world." "And you'll promise me that, if you're ever sorry, you'll come straight and tell me, that you'll ask me to set you free?" "I promise." "Then everything is all right between you and me?" "Yes, but I'm ashamed, bitterly ashamed." "You mustn't be, for I'm very glad." "We'll try to forget the wreckage together. I couldn't have asked, unless I had known about the other man, and you wouldn't have told me, I know. It wouldn't have been like you to tell me." There was a knock. The door opened, and the nurse came in, watch in hand. "I'm sorry, Miss Bernard, but you can come tomorrow if he's well enough." "I'll be well enough," said Allison, smiling. "Of course," Rose assured him, shaking hands in friendly fashion. "Don't forget that it's a secret." "I won't. Good-bye, Rose." When she had gone, the nurse studied him furtively from across the room. He had changed in some subtle way. He seemed to be stronger than before. Unless it was excitement to be followed by a reaction, Miss Bernard had done him good. The night would prove definitely one way or the other. Allison slept soundly until daybreak, for the first time, not stupor, but natural sleep. The nurse began to wonder if it was possible that a hand so badly crushed and broken could be healed. Hitherto her service had been mechanically kind. She had taken no interest because she saw no hope. How wonderful it would be if that long procession of learned counselors should be mistaken after all. Rose walked home, disdaining the waiting carriage. She had forgotten her hat, and the sunset lent radiance to a face that needed no more. By rare tact and kindness, Allison had removed the sting from her shame, and the burden she had borne so long was lifted from her heavy heart. She was happier now than she had ever been before in her life, but she must hide her joy from the others as she had previously hidden her pain, or tried to. She knew that Isabel would not see, but Aunt Francesca's eyes were keen, and she could not even tell her just now. How strange it would be to wake in the night without that dull, dead pain. How strange it was to feel herself needed, and oh, the joy of serving him. She thrilled with the ecstasy of sacrifice, with the maternal compassion which is a vital element in woman's love for man, sublimated beyond passion and self-seeking, and asking only the right to give. She poured out the treasure of her soul at his feet, though her pride demanded that he must never know. When she went into the house, light seemed to enter the shaded room with her. No one was there, but the open piano waited. ready to receive a confidence. With a laugh that was half a sob of joy, she sat down, her fingers readily finding the one thing that suited her mood. The wild, half-savage music rang through the house in full, deep chords, but only Rose knew the words, which, in her mind, fitted themselves to the melody as though she dared to sing them. Less than the dust beneath thy chariot wheel, less than the rust that never stained thy sword, less than the trust thou hast in me, O Lord, even less than these. Less than the weed that grows beside thy door, less than the speed of hours spent far from thee, less than the need thou hast in life of me, even less am I. Upstairs, Isabel yawned lazily, and wondered why Rose should play so loud, but Aunt Francesca smiled to herself, for she knew that Allison was better, and that Rose was glad. End of chapter 18. Chapter 19 of Old Rose and Silver. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Old Rose and Silver by Myrtle Reed. Chapter 19. Over the Bar. As a flower may bloom in a night, joy returned to Madame Bernard's house after long absence. There was no outward sign, for Rose was still quiet and self-controlled, but her face was a shade less pale, and there was a tremulous music in her voice. Isabel had ceased to limp, but still dwelt upon the shock and its lingering effects. She amused herself in her own way, reading paper-covered novels, feasting upon chocolates, teasing Mr. Boffin, and playing solitaire. Madame remarked to Rose that Isabel seemed to have a cosmic sense of time. The guest never came downstairs till luncheon was announced, and did not trouble herself to make an elaborate or even appropriate toilet. Madame began to wonder how long Isabel intended to remain, and to see the wisdom of the modern fashion of appointing the hour of departure in the invitation. Yet, as she said to herself rather grimly, she would have invited Isabel to remain through the summer, and perhaps in the early autumn she might return to town of her own accord. Moreover, there appeared to be no graceful way of requesting an invited guest to leave. Though Madame was annoyed by the mere fact of Isabel's presence, she had ceased to distress Rose, who dwelt now in a world apart from the others. She spent her afternoons at the other house, playing softly downstairs, reading to Allison, or talking to him of the brilliant future that she insisted was to be his. Neither of them spoke of the hour in which Rose had unwittingly revealed herself, nor did they seem to avoid the subject. Allison had taken her for granted, on a high plane of pure friendliness, and not for an instant did he translate her overpowering impulse as anything but womanly pity. She practiced for an hour or two every morning that she might play better in the afternoon. She ransacked the library for interesting and cheerful things to read to him, and she even found a game or two that he seemed to enjoy. From Madame Francesca's spotless kitchen came many a dainty dish to tempt his capricious appetite, and all the flowers from both gardens daily made a bower of his room. Constantly, too, Rose brought the message of hopefulness and good cheer. From her abounding life and superb vitality he drew unconscious strength. The hidden forces that defy analysis once more exerted themselves in his behalf. So far as man is of the earth, earthy by the earth and its fruits may he be healed, but the heavenly part of him may be ministered unto only by the angels of God. His old fear of the darkness had gone, and the night light had been taken out into the hall. In the faint glow he could see the objects in his room distinctly during the brief intervals of wakefulness. A flower dropped from its vase, a book lying half open, a crumpled handkerchief upon his chiffonier, the pervading scent of attar of roses and dried petals. All these brought him a strange sense of nearness to Rose, as a perfume may be distilled from a memory. Day by day Isabel became more remote. He thought of her without emotion, when he thought of her at all, for only women may know the agony of love enduring after the foundation upon which it was built has been swept away. The strange men from distant places came less frequently. Days would pass and bring no word. The country doctor who had first been called stopped occasionally when time permitted, and his faithful old horse needed a little rest, but he only shook his head.
He admitted to the nurse that he was greatly surprised because the inevitable operation had not yet become imperative. Colonel Kent seemed to have been lost for almost a week. During that time no word had been received from him, and Madame's daily bulletin, "No change for the worse," had been returned, marked "Not found." She was vaguely troubled and uneasy, fearing that something might have happened to him, but forebore to speak of her fears. One morning, while Allison was still asleep, the nurse wakened him gently. "A new man, Mr. Allison. Can you see him now?" "I don't care," he replied. "Bring him in." The newcomer was a young man. One would have guessed that the ink was scarcely dry on his diploma. He had a determined mouth, a square chin, kind eyes, and the buoyant, youthful courage that, by itself, carries one far upon any chosen path. He smiled at Allison, and Allison smiled back, in friendly fashion. "Now," said the young man, "let's see." His big fingers were astonishingly gentle. They worked with marvelous dexterity, and for the first time the dreaded examination was almost painless. He asked innumerable questions, both of Allison and the nurse, and wanted to know who had been there previously. The nurse had kept no record, but she knew some of the men, and mentioned their names, names to conjure with in the professional world. Even the two great Germans had said it was of no use. The young man wrinkled his brows in deep thought. "What have you been using?" he inquired of the nurse. "Everything. Come here." She led him into the next room, where a formidable array of bottles and boxes almost covered a large table. He looked them all over, carefully scrutinizing the names on the druggist label, sniffing here and there, occasionally holding some one bottle to the light, and finally, out of sheer youthful curiosity, counting them. Then he laughed, a cheery, hearty laugh that woke long sleeping echoes in the old house, and made Allison smile in the next room. "It seems," he commented, "that a doctor has to leave a prescription as other men leave cards, just as a polite reminder of the call." "What shall I do with them?" "Dump 'em all out. I don't care. Or wait a minute. There's no rush." He went back to Allison. "I see you've got quite a drug store here. Are you particularly attached to any special concoction?" "Indeed I'm not. Most of 'em have hurt sinfully." "I don't know that anything has to be painful or disagreeable in order to be healing," remarked the young man, thoughtfully. "Would you like to throw 'em all out the window?" "I certainly would." "All right. That'll be good business." He swung Allison's bed around so that his right arm rested easily on the window sill, requested the nurse to wheel the drug store within easy reach, and rapidly uncorked bottle after bottle with his own hands. "Now then, get busy." He sat by, smiling, while Allison poured the varying contents of the drug store on the ground below and listened for the sound of breaking glass, when the bottle swiftly followed the last gurgling drop. When all had been disposed of, the nurse took out the table, and the young man smiled expansively at Allison. "Feel better?" "I think so." "Good. Now look here. How much does your hand mean to you?" "How much does it mean?" repeated Allison pitifully. "It means life, career, everything." "Enough to make a fight for it, then, I take it?" Dull color surged by waves into Allison's white face. "What do you mean?" he asked in a broken voice. "Tell me what you mean." But the young man was removing his coat. "Hot day," he was saying, "and the young lady won't mind my negligee as long as the braces don't show. Strange how women hate nice, new braces. Say," he said to the nurse as she returned, "get somebody to go up to the station and bring down my trunk, will you?" "Trunk?" echoed Allison. "Sure," smiled the young man. "My instructions were to stay if I saw any hope. So I brought along my trunk. I'm always looking for a chance to hope, and I've discovered that it's one of the very best ways to find it." The nurse had hastened away upon her errand. The new element in the atmosphere of the sick room had subtly affected her also. "Don't fence," Allison was saying huskily. "I've asked so much that I've quit asking." The young man nodded complete understanding. "I know. The mossbacks sit around and look wise and expect to work miracles on a patient who doesn't know what they're doing, and finally gets the impression that he isn't considered fit to know. Far be it from me to disparage the pioneers of our noble profession, but I'm modest enough to admit that I need help, and the best help, every time, comes from the patient himself." He drew up his chair beside the bed and sat down. Allison's eager eyes did not swerve from his face. "Mind you," he went on, "I don't promise anything. I can't conscientiously. In getting a carriage out of the mud, more depends upon the horse than on the driver. Nature will have to do the work. I can't. All I can do is to guide her gently. If she's pushed, she gets bulky. Maybe there's something ahead of her that I don't see, and there's no use spurring her ahead when she's got to stop and get her breath before she can go uphill. That hand can't heal itself without good blood to draw upon it, and good material to make bone and nerve of. So we'll begin to stoke up gradually, and meanwhile I'll camp right here and see what's doing. And if you can bring yourself to sort of, well, sing at your work, you know, it's going to make the job a lot easier." Allison drew a long breath of relief. "You give me hope," he said. "Sure," returned the young man with an infectious laugh. "A young surgeon never has much else when he starts, nor for some time to come. Want to sit up?" "Why," Allison breathed in astonishment, "I can't." "Who said so?" "Everybody. They all said I must lie perfectly still." "Of course," mused the young man aloud. "Blood may move around all right of itself, and then again it may not. Wouldn't do any harm to stir it up a bit and remind the red corpuscles not to loaf on the job." The nurse came back to say that the trunk would be up immediately. "Good. Can I have a bunk in the next room?" Without waiting for her answer, he requested raw eggs and milk, beaten up with a little cream and sherry. While Allison was drinking it, he moved a big easy chair up near the window, opened every shutter wide, and let the hot sun stream into the room. He expeditiously made a sling for the injured hand, slipped it painlessly into place, put a strong arm under Allison's shoulders, and lifted him to a sitting posture on the edge of the bed. "Now then, forward march. Just lean on me." Muscles long unused trembled under the strain, but finally he made the harbor of the easy chair, gasping for breath. "Good," said the young man. "At this rate, we'll soon have clothes on us and be outdoors." "Really?" asked Allison, scarcely daring to believe his ears. "Sure," replied the marvelous young man confidently. "What's the use of keeping a whole body in the house on account of one hand? I'm going to tell you just one thing more. Then we'll quit talking shop and proceed to politics or anything else you like. I knew a man once who was a trapeze performer in a circus, and he was training his son in the same lofty profession. The boy insisted that he couldn't do it, and finally the man said to him, 'Look here, kid, if you'll put your heart over the bar, your body will follow all right.' And sure enough it did. Now, you get your heart over the bar and trust your hand to follow. Get the idea?" The sound of the piano below chimed in with the answer. A rippling, laughing melody danced up the stairs and into the room. The young man listened a moment, then asked, "Who?" "A friend of mine, my very dearest friend." "More good business. I think I'll go down and talk to her. What's her name?" "Rose." "What's the rest of it? I can't start in that way, you know. Bad form." "Bernard. Rose Bernard." As quickly and silently as he did everything else, the young man went downstairs, and the piano stopped, but only for a moment, as he requested her, with an airy wave of the hand, not to mind him. When she finished the old song she was playing, he called her by name, introduced himself, and invited her out into the garden, because, as he said, "Walls not only have ears, but telephones." "Say," he began, by way of graceful preliminary, "you look to me as though you had sense." "Thank you," she replied demurely. "Sense," he resumed, "is lamentably scarce, especially the variety misnamed common, or even horse. I'm no mental healer, nor anything of that sort, you know, but it's reasonable to suppose that, if the mind can control the body, after a fashion, when the body is well, it's entitled to show when the body isn't well. Don't you think so?" Rose assented, though she did not quite grasp what he said. His all-pervading breeziness affected her much as it had Allison. "Now," he continued, "I'm not unprofessional enough to knock anybody, but I gather that there's been a procession of undertakers down here making that poor chap upstairs think there's no chance. I'm not saying there is, but there's no reason why we shouldn't trot along until we have to stop. It isn't necessary to amputate just yet, and until it is necessary,
There's nothing to hinder us from working like the devil to save him from it, is there?"
"Surely not."
"All right. Are you in on it?"
"I'm in," replied Rose slowly, "on anything and everything that human power can do, day or night, until we come to the last stitch."
"Good for you. I'll appoint you first lieutenant. I guess that nurse is all right, though she doesn't seem to be unduly optimistic."
"She's had nothing to make her so. Everything's been discouraging so far."
"Plenty of discouragement in the world," he observed. "Hand it out free of charge, without paying people to bring it into the house when you're peevish."
"Very true," she answered, then her eyes filled. "Oh," she breathed, with white lips, "if you only can."
"We'll have a try for it," he said, then continued kindly, "No salt water upstairs, you know."
"I know,"
she sighed, wiping her eyes. "Then on with the dance. Let joy be unconfined." Rose obediently went back to the piano. The arrival of the trunk and the composition of a hopeful telegram to Colonel Kent occupied the resourceful visitor for 10 or 15 minutes. Then he went back to his patient, who had already begun to miss him. "You forgot to tell me your name," Allison suggested. "Sure enough. Call me Jack, or Dr. Jack, when I'm not here and I have to be called.
But as you said yourself, a few minutes ago, I can't begin that way. What's the rest of it?"
"If you'll listen," responded the young man solemnly, "I'll unfold before your eyes the one blot upon the scutcheon of my promising career. My full name is Jonathan Ebenezer Middlekauffer."
"Excuse me," stammered Allison.
The young man laughed joyously. "You can search me," he answered with a shrug. "The gods must have been in a sardonic mood about the time I arrived to gladden this sorrowful sphere. I've never used more of it than I could help, and everybody called me Jem until I went to college, the initials making a shorter and more agreeable name. But before I'd been there a week I was Jemima or Aunt Jemima to the whole class. So I changed it myself, though it took a thrashing to make 2 or 3 of 'em remember that my name was Jack."
"How did you happen to come here?"
queried Allison, without much interest. "The man who was down here on the 5th sent me. He told me about you and suggested that my existence might be less wearing if I had something to do. He just passed along his instructions and faded gracefully out of sight, saying, 'You'd better go, Middlekauffer, as your business seems to be the impossible.' So I packed up and took the first train."
"What did he mean by saying that your business was impossible?"
"Not impossible, but the impossible. Good heavens, man, don't things get mixed like that? All he meant was that such small reputation as I have been able to acquire was earned by doing jobs that the other fellows shirked. I'm ambidextrous," he added modestly, "and that, I guess, helps some. Let's play piquet." When Rose came up an hour or so later, they were absorbed in the game and did not see her until she spoke. She was overjoyed to see Allison sitting up, but, observing that she was not especially needed, invented a plausible errand and said good-bye, promising to come the next day. "Nice girl," remarked Dr. Jack, shuffling the cards for Allison. "Mighty nice girl."
"My future wife," answered Allison proudly, forgetting his promise.
"More good business. You'd be a brute if you didn't save that hand for her. She's entitled to the best that you can give her."
"And she shall have it," returned Allison.
Dr. Jack's quick ears noted a new determination in the voice, that only a few hours before had been weak and wavering, and he nodded his satisfaction across the card table. That night, while Allison slept soundly, and the nurse also, having been told that she was off duty until called, the young man recklessly burned gas in the next room, with pencil and paper before him. First he carefully considered the man with whom he had to deal, then mapped out a line of treatment, complete to the last detail. "There," he said to himself, "by that we stand or fall." The clock struck 3, but the young man still sat there, oblivious to his surroundings, or to the fact that even strong and healthy people occasionally need a little sleep. At last a smile lighted up his face. What fun it would be, he thought, for him to give a special concert and invite every blessed mossback who said impossible. It wouldn't please me or anything, would it, to stand at the door and see 'em come in? Oh, no. There was a stir in the next room, and Allison called him softly. "Yes?" It was only a word, but the tone, as always, was vibrant with good cheer. "I just wanted to tell you," Allison said, that my heart is over the bar." In the dark, the two men's hands met. "More good business," commented Dr. Jack. "Just remember what somebody said of Columbus. One day with life and hope and heart is time enough to find a world. Go to sleep now. I'll see you in the morning." "All right," Allison returned, but he did not sleep. Even after certain low sounds usually associated with comfortable slumber came from the doctor's room, he lay there, waiting happily, while from far mysterious sources life streamed into him, as the sap rises into the trees at the call of spring. Across the despairing darkness, a signal had been flashed to him, and he was answering it in every fiber of body and soul. End of chapter 19. Chapter 20 of Old Rose and Silver. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Old Rose and Silver by Myrtle Reed. Chapter 20. Risen from the Dead. Colonel Kent, in a distant structure which, by courtesy, was called the hotel, had pushed away his breakfast untasted, save for a small portion of the nondescript fluid the frowsy waitress called coffee. He had been delayed, missed his train at the junction point, and, fretting with impatience, had been obliged to pass the night there. He had wired to Madame Francesca the night before, but as yet had received no answer. He had personally consulted every surgeon of prominence in the surrounding country, and all who would not say flatly, without further information that he could give them, that there was no chance, had been asked to go and see for themselves. One by one their reports came back to him, unanimously hopeless. Heartsick and discouraged, he rallied from each disappointment only to face defeat again. He had spent weeks in fruitless journeying, following up every clue that presented itself, waited days at hospitals for chiefs of staff, and made the dreary round of newspaper offices, where knowledge of every conceivable subject is supposedly upon file for the asking. One enterprising editor, too modern to be swayed by ordinary human instincts, had turned the Colonel over to the star reporter, a young man with eyes like Allison's. By well-timed questions and sympathetic offers of assistance, he dragged the whole story of his wanderings from the unsuspecting old soldier. It made a double page in the Sunday edition, including the illustrations, a human interest story of unquestionable value, introduced by a screaming headline in red, "Old soldier on the march to save son, violinist about to lose hand." When the Colonel saw it, his eyes filled so that he could not see the words that danced through the mist, and the paper trembled from his hands to the floor. He was too nearly heartbroken to be angry, and too deeply hurt to take heed of the last stab. No word reached him until late at night, when he arrived at the Metropolitan Hotel that he had made his headquarters. When he registered, 2 telegrams were handed to him, and he tore them open eagerly. The first was from Madame Francesca. "Slight change for the better. New man gives hope. Better return at once." The second one was wholly characteristic. "Willing to take chance. Am camping on job. Come home." It was signed J.E. Middlecoffer. When he got to his room, the Colonel sat down to think. He knew no one of that name, had never even heard it before. Perhaps Francesca. It would have been like her, to work with him and say nothing until she had something hopeful to say. His heart warmed toward her, then he forgot her entirely in a sudden realization of the vast meaning of the 2 bits of yellow paper. Why, it was hope. It was a fighting chance, presenting itself where hitherto had been only despair. He could scarcely believe it. He took the 2 telegrams closer to the light and read the blessed words over and over again. Then, trembling with weakness and something more, tottered back to his chair. Until then he had not known how weary he was, nor how the long weeks of anxiety and fruitless effort had racked him to the soul. As one may bear a burden bravely, yet faint the moment it is lifted, his strength failed him in the very hour that he had no need of it. He sat there for a long time before he was able to shut off the light and creep into bed, with his tear-wet cheek pillowed upon one telegram, and a wrinkled hand closely clasping the other, as though holding fast to the message meant the keeping of the hope it brought. Utterly exhausted, he slept until noon. When he woke, it was with the feeling that something vitally important had happened. He could not remember what it was until he heard the rustling of paper and saw the 2 telegrams. He read them once more in the clear light of day, fearing to find the message but a fantasy of the night. To his unbounded relief it was still there, no dream of water to the man dying of thirst, but a living reality that sunlight did not change. "Thank God," he cried aloud, sobbing for the very joy. "Thank God." Meanwhile, the resourceful one had shown the nurse how to cut a sleeve out of one of Allison's old coats and open the underarm seam. Having done this, she was requested to treat a negligee shirt in the same way. Then the village barber was sent for and instructed to do his utmost. "Funny," remarked Dr. Jack pensively, "that nobody has thought of doing that before. If I hadn't come just as I did, you'd soon have looked like a chimpanzee, and eventually you'd have been beyond the reach of anything but a lawn-mower. They didn't even think to braid your hair and tie it with a blue ribbon." The nurse laughed, so did Allison, but the pensive expression of the young man's face did not change. "I've had occasion lately," he continued, "to observe the powerful tonic effect of clothes. A woman patient told me once that the moral support afforded by a well-fitting corset was inconceivable to the mind of a mere man. She said that a corset is to a woman what a hat is to a man. It prepares for any emergency, enables one to meet life on equal terms, and even to face a rebellious cook or janitor with that repose which marks the caste of Vere de Vere." "I've often wondered," returned Allison, "why I felt so much more adequate with my hat on." "Clear case of inherited instincts. The wild dog used to make himself a smooth bed in the rushes of long grass by turning around several times upon the selected spot. Consequently, the modern dog has to do the same stunt before he can go to sleep. The hat is a modification of the helmet, which always had to be worn outside the house. In the days when hold-ups and murders were even more frequent than now, the desire for a walking-stick comes from the old fashion of carrying a spear or a sword. If a man took off his helmet, it was equivalent to saying, 'In the presence of my friend, I am safe.' When he takes off his hat to a lady now, he merely means, 'You're not a voter.' You'll notice that in any gathering of men, helmets are still worn." So he chattered, with apparent unconcern, but none the less he was keenly watching his patient. With tact that would have done credit to a diplomat, he kept the conversation in agreeable channels. By noon Allison had his clothes on, the coat being pinned under the left arm with 2 safety pins that did not show, and was out upon an upper veranda. Dr. Jack encouraged him to walk whenever he felt that he could, even though it was only to the other end of the veranda and back to his chair. Somewhat to his astonishment, Allison began to feel better. "I believe you're a miracle worker," he said. "2 days ago I was in bed, with neither strength, ambition, nor hope. Now I've got all 3. "No miracle," replied the other modestly, "merely sense." That afternoon the Crosby twins telephoned to know whether they might call, and the nurse brought the query upstairs. "If they're amusing," said the doctor, "let 'em come." Allison replied that the twins had been highly amusing until they ran, the Yellow Peril over his left hand. "Poor little devils," he mused. "They've got something on their minds." "Mighty lucky for you that it wasn't a macadamized boulevard instead of a sandy country road," observed the doctor. "The softness underneath has given us a doubt to work on." "How so?" "It's easier to crush anything on a hard surface than it is on a pillow, isn't it?" "Of course. I hadn't thought of that. If there had been more sand—" "I look to you to furnish that," returned the other with a quick twist of meaning. "You've got plenty of sand, if you have half a chance to show it." When do you think you'll know?" Allison asked, half afraid of the answer. "If I knew, I'd be glad to tell you, but I don't. I've found out that it's easier to say I don't know straight out in plain English than it is to sidetrack. It used to be bad form, professionally, to admit ignorance, but it isn't now. People soon find it out, and you might as well tell 'em at the start. You just go on and keep the fuel bins well supplied and the red corpuscles busy, and pretty soon we'll see what's doing." The twins were late in coming, because they had a long discussion as to the propriety of wearing their sable garments. Romeo disliked the trouble of changing, argued that Allison ought to see that their grief was sincere, Juliet insisted that the sight would prove depressing. At the end of a lively hour, they compromised upon white, which was worn by people in mourning and was not depressing. Juliet donned a muslin gown, and Romeo put on his tennis flannels, which happened to be clean. As they took pains to walk upon the grass and avoid the dusty places, they were comparatively fresh when they arrived, though very warm from the long walk. Both had inexpressibly dreaded seeing Allison, yet the reality lacked the anticipated terror, as often happens. They liked Dr. Jack immensely from the start, and were greatly relieved to see Allison up and outdoors, instead of lying in a darkened room. Almost before they knew it, they were describing their sacrificial rites and their repentance, with a wealth of detail that left nothing to be desired. Dr. Jack was suddenly afflicted with a very bad cough, but he kept his back to them and used his handkerchief a great deal. Even Allison was amused by their austere young faces and the earnest devotion with which they had performed their penance. "We've had your car fixed," said Romeo. "It's all right now." "We've paid the bill," added Juliet. "We want to pay everything," Romeo continued. "Everything," she echoed. "I don't know that I want the car," Allison answered kindly. "If I had been a good driver, I could have backed into the turn before you got there, and let you whiz by. I'm sorry yours is burned. Won't you take mine?" "No," answered Romeo with finality. "We don't deserve even to ride in one," Juliet remarked. "We ought to have to walk all the rest of our lives." "You people make me tired," interrupted Dr. Jack. "Just because you've been mixed up in an accident, you're about to get yourselves locoed, as they say out west, on the subject of automobiles. By careful cultivation, you could learn to shy at a baby carriage, and throw a fit at the sight of a wheelbarrow. The time to nip that is right at the start." "How would you do it?" queried Allison. His heart was heavy with dread of all automobiles, past, present, and to come. "Same way they break a colt. Get him used to the harness, then to the shafts, and so on. Now I can run any car that ever was built, make it stand on its hind wheels if I want to, and roll through a crowd without making anybody even wink faster. I think I'll go out and get that one and take the whole bunch of you out for a cure." Juliet was listening attentively with her blue eyes wide open and her scarlet lips parted. Dr. Jack was suddenly conscious of a new sensation. "I see," she said. "Romie made me hold snakes by their tails until I wasn't afraid of them, and made me kill mice and even rats. Only sissy girls are afraid of snakes and rats. And just because we were both afraid to go by the graveyard at night, we made ourselves do it. We can walk through it now, even if there isn't any moon, and never dodge a single tombstone." "Was it hard to learn to do it?" asked the doctor. If he was amused, he did not show it now. "No," Juliet answered, "because just before we did it, we read about its being called God's Acre. So I told Romie that God must be there as much or more than he was anywhere else. So how could we be afraid?" "After you once get it into your head that God is everywhere," added Romeo, "you can't be afraid because there's nothing to be afraid of." The simple, childlike faith appealed to both men strongly. Allison was much surprised, for he had not imagined that there was a serious side to the twins. "Will you forgive us?" asked Juliet humbly. "Please," added Romeo. "With all my heart," Allison responded readily. "I've never thought there was anything to forgive." "Then our sacrifice is over," cried Juliet joyously. "Yes," her brother agreed, with a wistful expression on his face, "and tonight we can have something to eat." The twins never lingered long after the object of a visit was accomplished, so they rose almost immediately to take their departure. "Cards, Romie," Juliet suggested in an audible whisper. Romeo took a black-bordered envelope from an inner pocket and gravely extended a card to each. Then they bowed themselves out, resisting with difficulty the temptation to slide down the banister instead of going downstairs 2 steps at a time. Dr. Jack's mobile face had assumed an entirely new expression. He put away the card inscribed the Crosby twins as though it was an article of great value, then leaned out over the veranda railing to catch a glimpse of the 2 flying figures in white. "Upon my word!" he exclaimed. Allison laughed aloud. "You're not disappointed in the twins, are you?" "If I were going to be run over," remarked the doctor, ignoring the question, "I believe I'd choose them to do it. Think of the little pagans burning their car and repenting in sackcloth and ashes, not to mention shooting the dogs and living upon penitential fare." "Poor kids," Allison said with a sigh. "Tell me about 'em," pleaded Dr. Jack. "Tell me everything you know about 'em, especially Juliet." "I don't know much," replied the other, "for I came back here only a few months ago, and when I went abroad they were merely enfants terribles, imperfectly controlled by a pair of doting parents." However, he gladly told what he knew of the varied exploits of the twins, and his eager listener absorbed every word. At length, when Allison could think of no more, and the afternoon shadows grew long, they went in. Consigning his patient to the care of the nurse, the doctor went down into the garden, to walk back and forth upon the long paths, gaze open-mouthed down the road, and moon, like the veriest schoolboy, over Juliet's blue eyes. Her pagan simplicity, her frank boyishness, and her absolute unconsciousness of self appealed to him irresistibly. "That dear kid," he said to himself fondly, "the blessed little kid. Wonder how old she is." Then he remembered that Allison had told him the twins were almost 21, but Juliet seemed absurdly young for her years. "The world will take her," he sighed to himself, "and change her in a little while so even her own brother won't know her. She'll lace and wear high heels and follow the latest fashion, whether it suits her or not, and touch up her pretty cheeks with rouge, twist her hair into impossible coiffures, and learn all the wicked ways of the world. The wavy masses of tawny hair, the innocent blue eyes, as wide and appealing as a child's, the clear rosy skin, and the parted scarlet lips, all these would soon be spoiled by the thousand deceits of fashion. And I can't help it," he thought sadly. Then his face brightened. "By George," he said aloud, "I'm only 28. Wonder if the kid could learn to stand me around the house." He laughed from sheer joy. "I'll have a try for her," he continued to himself. "Me for Juliet, and if the gods are kind, Juliet for me." His reflections were interrupted by the arrival of the station hack. He instantly surmised that the man who hurried toward the house was Colonel Kent, and, on the veranda, intercepted him. "Colonel Kent?" "Yes, Doctor?" "Middlekauffer, for purposes of introduction. For purposes of conversation, Dr. Jack. Or just plain Jack. Never cared much for handles to names. You got my wire?" "Yes. Who sent you here?" "Forbes. Down here on the 5th. Met him out in the next state, at an operation. He told me to come as my business was the impossible. Told me you'd stand for it, don't you know, and all that sort of thing." "I'm very glad. How is he?" "Doing very nicely, all things considered." "Is there a chance?" the Colonel cried eagerly. "A real chance?" "My dear man, until amputation is the only thing to be done, there's always a chance. Personally, I'm very hopeful, though I've been called a dreamer more than once. But we've got him chirked up a lot, and he's getting his nerve back. And this morning I thought I detected a slight improvement, though I was afraid to tell him so. We've all got to work for him, and work like the devil at that, if work will do it. Nothing worth while is ever done without work. Go up and see him." At the sound of a familiar step upon the stair, Allison turned deathly white. He waited, scarcely daring to breathe, until the half-closed door opened, and his father stood before him, smiling in welcome. Allison sprang forward, unbelieving, until his hand touched his father's, not cold, as though he had risen from the grave, but warmly human and alive. "Lad, dear lad, I've come back at last." Allison's answering cry of joy fairly rang through the house. "Dad, oh, Dad, I thought you were dead." End of chapter 20. Chapter 21 of Old Rose and Silver. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Old Rose and Silver by Myrtle Reed. Chapter 21. Saved and Lost. Alternately possessed by hope and doubt, the young surgeon worked during the weeks that followed as he had never worked before. He kept his doubt to himself, however, and passed on his hope to the others when he could do so conscientiously. Allison had ceased to ask questions, but eagerly watched the doctor's face. He knew, without being told, just when the outlook was dubious and when it was encouraging. The doctor did not permit either Rose or Colonel Kent to hope too much. Both were with Allison constantly, and Madame drove over 3 or 4 times a week. Gradually a normal atmosphere was established, and without apparent effort they kept Allison occupied and amused. It seemed only natural and right that Rose should be there, and both Allison and his father had come to depend upon her, in a way, as though she were the head of the household. The servants came to her for orders, people who came to inquire for Allison asked for her, and she saved the Colonel from many a lonely evening after Allison had said good night and the doctor had gone out for a long walk, as he said, to clear the cobwebs from his brain. Because of Isabel, whom he felt that he could not meet, the Colonel did not go over to the Bernards. Allison had not alluded to her in any way, but Madame had told the Colonel at the first opportunity. He had said quietly, "A small gain for so great a loss," and made no further comment, yet it was evident that he was relieved. Rose and Allison were back upon their old friendly footing, to all intents and purposes. Never by word or look did Rose betray herself. Never by the faintest hint did Allison suggest that their relation to each other had in any way been changed. He was frankly glad to have her with him, urged her to come earlier and to stay later, and gratefully accepted every kindness she offered. Perhaps he had forgotten. Rose rather thought he had, but her self-revelation stood before her always like a vivid scarlet hour in procession of gray days. Yet the sting and shame of it were curiously absent, for nothing could exceed the gentle courtesy and deference that Allison instinctively accorded her. He saw her always as a thing apart, a goddess who, through divine pity, had stooped for an instant to be a woman, and had swiftly returned to her pedestal. Sustained by the joy of service, Rose asked no more, only to plan little surprises for him, to anticipate every unspoken wish, to keep him cheery and hopeful, to read or play to him without being asked. These things were as the life-blood to her heart. She had blossomed, too, into a new beauty. The 40 years had put lines of silver into her hair, but had been powerless to do more. Her lovely face, where the color came and went, the fleeting dimple at the corner of her mouth, and the crimson curve of her lips were eloquent with the finer, more subtle charm of maturity. Her shining eyes literally transfigured her. In their dark depths was a mysterious exaltation, as from some secret, holy rapture too great for words. Allison saw and felt it, yet did not know what it was. Once at sunset, when they were talking idly of other things, he tried to express it. "I don't know what it is, Rose, but there's something about you lately that makes me feel, well, though I were in a church at an Easter service. The sun through the stained-glass window, the blended fragrance of incense and lilies, and the harp and organ playing the intermezzo from Cavalleria, all that sort of thing, don't you know?" "Why shouldn't your best friend be glad," she answered gently, "when you have come to your own Easter, your rising from the dead?" The dull color surged into his face, then retreated in waves. "If you can be as glad as that," he returned, clearing his throat, "I'd be a brute ever to let myself be discouraged again." That night, during a wakeful hour, his thoughts went back to Isabel. For the first time he saw the affair in its true light, a brief, mad infatuation. He had responded to Isabel's youth and beauty and an old moonlit garden full of roses, much as his violin answered to his touch upon the strings. Had answered, he corrected himself, trying not to flinch at the thought. Even if his hand should heal, it was scarcely possible that he would ever play again, and he knew, as well as anyone, what brilliant promise the future had held for him. He remembered how wisely he had been trained from the very beginning, how Aunt Francesca had insisted upon mathematics, Latin and chemistry, as well as literature, history, and modern languages. He had protested to her only once. She had replied kindly but firmly that while broad culture and liberal education might not in itself create an artist, yet it could not possibly injure one. Since then, he had seen precocious children, developed in one line at the expense of all others, fail ignominiously in maturity because there was no foundation. The child wonder who had thrilled all Europe at 9 by his unnatural mastery of the violin was playing in an orchestra in a Paris café, where one of the numerous boy sopranos was the head waiter. How disappointed Aunt Francesca must be, even though she had too much self-control to show it. And his father. Allison swallowed a lump in his throat. After a lifetime of self-sacrificing devotion, the Colonel had seen all his efforts fail, but he had taken the blow standing, like the soldier that he was. In vain many a time Allison had wished that some of his father's fine courage might have been transmitted to him. And Rose, dear Rose, how persistently she held the new way open before him! How steadily she insisted that the creative impulse was higher than interpretive skill! How often she had reminded him of Carlyle's stirring call, "Produce, produce, though it be but the merest fraction of a fragment, produce it in God's name." He had noticed that the materials for composition were always close at hand, though she never urged him to work. He had come gradually to depend upon Rose a great deal more than he realized. Quite often he perceived the truth of the saying that a blue ribbon friendship is better than an honorable mention love. It was evident that Isabel had never loved him, though she had been pleased and flattered by his love for her. Even at the time that Aunt Francesca and Rose had congratulated him, and he had kissed them both in friendly fashion, he had taken passing note of the difference between Isabel and Rose. Of course it was only that Isabel was made of ice and Rose of flesh and blood, but still it was pleasant to remember that— His thoughts began to stray into other fields. Rose was his promised wife as far as name went, yet she treated him with the frank, good comradeship that a liberal social code makes possible between men and women. As far as Rose was concerned, there was no sentiment in the world. When she read to him, it was invariably a story of adventure, or of humorous complications, or a well-chosen exposition of some recent advance in science or art. Their conversation was equally impersonal, even at the rare times they chanced to be alone. Rose made Colonel Kent, Aunt Francesca, Dr. Jack, and even the nurse equally welcome to Allison's society. He went freely from room to room on the upper floor, but had not yet been downstairs, as a possible slip on the steps might do irreparable injury. Dr. Jack wanted to get him downstairs and outdoors, believing that actual contact with the earth is almost as good for people as it is for plants, but saw no way to manage it without a stretcher, which he knew Allison would violently resent. The twins came occasionally, by special invitation, though nobody noticed that it was always Dr. Jack who suggested it. Once they brought a pan of Juliet's famous fudges, which were politely appreciated by the others and extravagantly praised by the doctor. The following day he was rewarded by a private pan of especial rich fudges, but Romeo brought it on his way to the post office. There was a daily card party upon the upper veranda, and sometimes meals were served there. The piano had been moved upstairs into a back room. The whole-hearted devotion of the household was beautiful to behold, yet underneath it all, like an unseen current, was the tense strain of waiting. It was difficult not to annoy Dr. Jack with questions. Rose and the Colonel continually reminded themselves and each other that he would be only too glad to bring encouragement at the moment he found it, and that by quiet and patience they could help him most. Juliet had pleaded earnestly with Dr. Jack to save Allison's hand. "If you don't," she insisted with uplifted eyes, "I'll be miserable all the rest of my life." "Bless your little heart," the doctor had answered kindly. "I'd do most anything to keep you from being miserable, even the impossible, which happens to be my specialty." She did not quite understand, but sent a burnt offering to the doctor in the shape of a chocolate cake. He had returned the compliment by sending her the biggest box of candy she had ever seen, and, as it arrived about noon, she and Romeo had feasted upon it until they could eat no more, and had been uncomfortably ill for 2 days. Romeo had attributed their misfortune to the candy itself, but Juliet believed that their constitutions had been weakened by their penitential fare, and as soon as she was able, proved her point by finishing the last sweet morsel without painful results. The summer waned and tints of palest gold appeared here and there upon the maples. The warm wind had the indefinable freshness of the autumn sea, blown far inland at dawn. Allison became impatient and restless. The Colonel went off alone for long, moody walks. Even Dr. Jack began to show the effects of the long strain. Only Rose was serene. Fortunately, no one guessed the tumult that lay beneath her outward calm. Her manner toward Allison was, if anything, more impersonal than ever, though she failed in no thoughtful kindness, no possible consideration. He accepted it all as a matter of course, but began to wish, vaguely, for something more. He forbore to remind her of their strange relation, and could not allude to the night he had kissed her, while his fiancée stood near by. Yet late one afternoon, when she had excused herself a little earlier than usual, he called her back. "Rose?" "Yes?" she returned quickly and stood before him. just out of his reach.
"What is it? What can I do for you?"
The tone was kind but impersonal, as always.
"Nothing,"
he sighed, turning his face away. That night she pondered long. What could Allison want that she had not given? The blood surged into her heart for an instant, then retreated. "Nonsense," she said to herself in tremulous anger. "It's impossible." Afterward, it seemed continually to happen that she was alone with Allison when the time came to say good night and drive home, or walk, escorted by Colonel Kent or the doctor. By common consent they seemed to make excuses to leave the room as the hour of departure approached, and she always found it easier when someone was there. Again, when she had made her adieus and had reached the door leading into the hall, Allison called her back. "Yes? Couldn't you just once, for good night?" he asked with difficulty. His face made his meaning clear. Rose bent, kissed him tenderly upon the forehead, and quickly left the room. Her heart was beating so hard that she did not know she stumbled upon the threshold, nor did she hear his low, "Thank you, dear." That night she could not sleep. "I can't," she said to herself miserably. "I can't possibly go on why should he make it so hard for me?" If the future was to be possible on the lines already laid down, he, too, must keep the impersonal attitude. Yet none the less, she was conscious of an uplifting joy that would not be put aside, but insistently demanded its right of expression. She did not dare trust herself to see Allison again, and yet she must. She could not fail him now, when he needed her so much, nor could she ask the others to see that they were not left alone. One night might be gained for respite by the plea of a headache, which is woman's friend as often as it is her enemy. And after that one day, what then? What other excuse could she make that would not seem heartless and cold? It was an old saying of Aunt Francesca's that, when you can't see straight ahead, it's because you are about to turn a corner. She tormented herself throughout the night with futile speculations that led to nothing except the headache which she had planned to offer as an excuse. A brief note gave her the day to herself, and also brought flowers from Allison, with a friendly note in his own hand. Dr. Jack was the messenger and took occasion to offer his services in the conquest of the headache, but Rose declined with thanks, sending down word that she preferred to sleep it off. Though breakfast might be a movable feast at Madame's, it was always consistently late. It was nearly 9 o'clock in the morning when the telephone wakened Madame from a dreamless sleep. She listened until it became annoying, but no one answered it. Finally she got up rather impatiently and went to it herself, anticipating Rose by only a minute. Tremulous with suspense, Rose waited, scarcely daring to breathe, until Madame turned with a cry of joy, the receiver falling from her nerveless hand. "Rose, Rose, he's saved! Our boy is saved! He's saved, do you understand?" "Truly? Is it sure?" "Blessedly sure. Oh, Rose, he's saved!" The little old lady was sobbing in an ecstasy of relief. Rose led her to a couch and waited quietly until she was almost calm, then went back to her own room. Once more her world was changed. As long ago she had seen how it must be with her should the one thing happen. She, with the others, had hoped and prayed for it. Her dearest dream had come true at last, and left her desolate. She was unselfishly glad for Allison, for the Colonel, Aunt Francesca, Dr. Jack, the sorrowing twins, and, in a way, for herself. It had been given her to serve him, and she had not hoped for more. It made things easier now, though she had not thought the corner would be turned in just this way. Having made up her mind and completed her plans, she went to Madame as soon as she was dressed. She had hidden her paleness with so little rouge that even Madame's keen eyes could not suspect it. "Aunt Francesca," she began without preliminary, "I've got to go away." "Why, dear, and where?" "For how long?" "Because I'm so tired. Things have been hard for me over there lately, and I don't care where I go." "I see," returned Madame tenderly. "You want to go away for a rest. You've needed it for a long time." "Yes." Rose nodded, swinging easily into the lie that did not deceive either. "Oh, Aunt Francesca, can I go to-day?" "Surely, at any hour you choose." "And you'll make it right?" Indeed I will. I will just say that you've been obliged to go away on business, to look after some investments for both of us, and I hope you'll stay away long enough to get the rest and change you've needed for almost a year."
"Oh, Aunt Francesca, how good you are! But where shall I go?"
Madame had been thinking of that. She knew the one place where Rose could go and attain her balance and solitude, untroubled by needless questions or explanations. With the feeling of the mother who gives her dead baby's dainty garments to a living child sorely in need, she spoke. "To my house up in the woods, the little house where love lived so long ago." Rose's pale lips quivered for an instant.
"What have I to do with love?"
"Go to the house where he lived once, and perhaps you may find out."
"I will. I'll be glad to go. If I could make the next train, could you arrange to have a trunk follow me?"
"Of course. Go on, dear. I know how it happens sometimes, that one can't stay in one place any longer. I suffered from wanderlust until I was almost 70, and it's a long time since you've been away."
"And you'll promise not to tell anybody?"
"I promise." While Rose was packing a suitcase, Madame brought her a rusty old-fashioned key and a card on which she had written directions for the journey. "I've ordered the carriage," she said, "and I'll drive down with you to see you safely off." After the packing was completed, and while there was nearly an hour to wait before the carriage would come, Rose locked her door, and after many failures, achieved her note.
"My dear Allison, you don't know how glad I am for you and how glad I shall be all the rest of my life. I've hoped and dreamed and prayed from the very beginning that it might be so, and I believe that, in time, you'll have back everything you have lost. Now that you no longer need me, I am going away to attend to some necessary business for Aunt Francesca and myself, and perhaps to rest a little while in some new place before I go back to my work. Of course, our make-believe engagement expires automatically now, and I hope you'll soon find the one woman meant to make you happy. I am glad to think that I've helped you a little when you came to a hard place, for the most that any one of us may do is to smooth the road. Remember me to the others, say good-bye for me, and believe me, with all good wishes, your friend always, Rose." When she sealed and addressed it, she had a queer sense of closing the door with her own hands upon all the joy life might have in store for her in years to come. Yet the past few weeks were secure beyond the power of change or loss, and her pride was saved. No one could keep her from loving him, and the thought brought a certain comfort to her sore heart. Wherever he might be, and whatever might happen to him, she could still love him from afar, and have, for her very own, the woman's joy of utmost giving. When the carriage came, she went down, and without a word put her note into Aunt Francesca's faithful hands. Isabel had not appeared, fortunately, and it was not necessary to leave any message. Aunt Francesca would make it right, as she always had with everybody. When the little old lady lifted her face, saying, "Good-bye, dear. Come back to me soon," Rose's heart misgave her. "I'll stay," she said brokenly. "I won't leave you."
But Madame only smiled and nodded toward the waiting train. She stood on the platform, waving her little lace-bordered handkerchief until the last car rounded the curve, and the fluttering bit of white that was waved in answer had vanished. Then Madame sighed, wiped her eyes, and drove home. End of chapter 21. Chapter 22 of Old Rose and Silver. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Old Rose and Silver by Myrtle Reed. Chapter 22. A Birthday Party. Allison received the note from Rose. At the time, he was expecting Rose herself, and was keenly disappointed. "She might at least have stopped long enough to say good-bye," he said to his father. "Don't be selfish, lad," laughed the Colonel. "We owe her now a debt that we can never hope to pay." The young man's face softened. "What a brick she has been!" Then to himself he added, "If she had loved me, she couldn't have done more." Life seemed very good to them both that crisp September morning. Just after breakfast, Dr. Jack had announced definitely that the crushed hand was saved, unless there should be some unlooked-for complication. "But, mind you," he insisted, I don't promise any violin playing, and there'll be scars, but we'll make it look as well as we can. Anyhow, you'll not be helpless."
Allison smiled happily. "Why can't I play, if it heals up all right?"
"There may be a nerve or two that won't work just right, or a twisted muscle, or something. However, we'll keep hoping."
The heavy weight that had lain so long upon Allison's heart was slow in lifting. At first he could not believe the good news, greatly to Dr. Jack's disgust.
"You don't seem to care much," he remarked. "I suppose you'd turn at least one somersault. The Colonel is more pleased than you are."
"Dear old Dad," said Allison gratefully. "I owe him everything."
"Everything?" repeated the doctor with lifted brows. "And where does Jonathan Ebenezer Middlekauffer come in, to say nothing of the future Mrs. Kent?"
Allison's face clouded for an instant. "I'll never forget what you've done for me. But there isn't any future, Mrs. Kent."
"No? Why, I thought—"
"So did I, but she's thrown me over and gone away. This morning she sent me a note of congratulation and farewell."
"Upon my word! What have you done to her?"
"Nothing. She says I don't need her any more now, so she's going away."
Dr. Jack paced back and forth on the veranda with his hands in his pockets. "The darkly mysterious ways of the ever feminine are wonderful beyond the power of words to portray. Apparently, you've had to choose between your hand and hers."
"I'm not sure," returned Allison thoughtfully, "that I wouldn't rather have hers than mine."
"Brace up, old man. Get well and go after her. The world isn't big enough to keep a man away from the woman he wants."
"But," answered Allison dejectedly, "she doesn't care for me. It was only womanly pity, and now that I don't need that, I've lost her."
"She doesn't care for you?" repeated the doctor. "Why, man, how can you sit there and tell a lie like that? Of course she cares."
Allison turned to look at him in astonishment. "It isn't possible."
"Isn't it? Then I don't know anything about human nature. Though I must confess I'm not up much on the feminine part of it. How long—"
"Just since the accident. The girl I was going to marry let me release her. She didn't want a cripple, you know."
"And Miss Bernard did? And you've disappointed her?"
"Something like that."
"You seem to have had fierce luck with girls. One gives you up because you've only got one hand, and the other because you've got two. There's no pleasing women. Hello, here comes another note. Maybe she's changed her mind."
For a breathless instant, Allison thought so too, but Dr. Jack was opening it.
"Mine," he said. "It's an invitation to Crosby's. Seems that they come of age after tomorrow, and I'm invited to supper to help celebrate. I won't go or anything, will I? Oh, no, of course not. I haven't seen him for a week. Are presents expected?"
"Your presence seems to be expected," remarked Allison.
"I'm glad you've got that out of your system," the doctor retorted with a scornful smile. "You ought to improve right along now."
"Is it a party?"
"They don't say so. I hope it isn't."
However, when Dr. Jack strolled up the dusty road, a carriage that must have come from Crosby's passed him. He stopped short, wildly considering an impulse of flight. Then he went on bravely, smiling at the thought that any entertainment given by the twins could be, by any possibility, a formal affair. The other guest was Isabel, whom Dr. Jack had not met and of whom he knew nothing. She observed him narrowly when opportunity offered, for she knew who he was and wondered what he had heard of her. Soon she became certain that her name carried no meaning to him, for he talked freely of Allison and the Colonel and frankly shared the joy of the twins at the welcome news.
"Oh," cried Juliet, clapping her hands in glee, "it's the very best birthday present we could have, isn't it, Romie?" "I should say," replied that young man with an expansive smile. "Say," he added to Dr. Jack, "you must be a brick." "I've only done my best," he responded modestly. Isabel could say nothing for some little time. She was furiously angry with Aunt Francesca because she had not told her. The day that Rose went away, everyone in the house had been very glad about something, even to the servants, but she had asked no questions and received no information, except that Rose had been obliged to go away very suddenly upon business of immediate importance. "You must be awful glad," said Juliet to Isabel. "Of course," answered Isabel coldly, clearing her throat. "He must feel pretty good," Romeo observed. "Yes," returned Dr. Jack, "except that he's lost his girl." Isabel flushed and nervously turned on her finger the diamond ring that she still wore. "He's had fierce luck with girls," resumed the doctor unthinkingly. "One passed him up because he was hurt, and the other because he was going to get well." The tense silence that ensued indicated that he had made a mistake of some sort. It had not occurred to him that the twins did not know of Allison's engagement to Rose, nor did he suspect Isabel's identity. Juliet was staring at Isabel in pained surprise. "Did you?" she asked slowly. "Throw him over because he got hurt?" "He offered to release me," said Isabel in a small, cold voice, "and I accepted. I did not know until just now that Cousin Rose had taken my leavings." The older woman's mysterious departure presented itself to her now in a new light. "Suffering Cyrus," said Dr. Jack aloud. "But I have put my foot into it. Look here, kind friends, I never was meant for a parlor, and I always make mistakes when I stray into one. My place is in a hospital ward, or at the bedside of those who have been given up to die. The complex social arena is not where I shine to my best advantage. There are too many rings to keep track of at once, and my mind gets cross-eyed." "Come on up to the attic," suggested Juliet, with a swift change of subject, "and we'll do stunts on a trapeze." Isabel and Dr. Jack sat side by side on a battered old trunk in stony silence while the twins were donning their gymnasium costumes. Fortunately, it did not take long, and the sight of Juliet hanging by her feet furnished the needed topic of conversation. The lithe little body seemed to be made of steel fibers. She swayed back and forth, catching Romeo as he made a flying leap from the other trapeze, as easily as another girl would have wielded a tennis racket. At length Dr. Jack interposed a friendly word of warning. "Look here, kid," he said. "You're made of flesh and blood, you know, just like the rest of us. Better cut out that trapeze business." "I don't know why," returned Juliet resentfully, as she slipped gracefully to the floor, right side up. "I'm as strong as Romie is, or almost as strong." "Girls do it in the circus," Romeo observed, wiping his flushed face. "Ever heard of any of 'em living to celebrate their 100th birthday?" queried Dr. Jack significantly. The twins admitted that they had not. "I don't care," cried Juliet. "I'd rather live 10 years and keep going than live to be 100 and have to sit still all the time." "No danger of your sitting still too long," returned Dr. Jack, good-humoredly. "It's hot up here, isn't it?" "Rather warm," Romeo agreed. "You folks can go downstairs until we get on our other clothes, if you like." They had reached the head of the stairs when Isabel changed her mind. "I believe I'll wait for Juliet," she said, turning back. So the doctor went down alone, inwardly reviling himself for his unlucky speech, and glad of an opportunity to contemplate the characteristic residence of the twins. The whole house was, frankly, a place where people did as they chose, and the furniture bore marks of having been used not wisely, but too well. Everything was clean, though not aggressively so. He ascribed the absence of lace curtains to Romeo and the Cloisonné vase to Juliet. The fishing rods in one corner were probably due to both. When the others came down, Juliet tied a big blue gingham apron over her white muslin gown and excused herself. She had been cooking for the better part of 2 days and took a housewifely pride in doing everything herself. They had chosen the things they liked the most, so the dinner was unusual as dinners go. Isabel, eating daintily, made no effort to conceal her disdain, but Dr. Jack ate heartily, praised everything, and brought the blush of pleasure to Juliet's rosy cheeks. Romeo, at the head of the table, radiated the hospitality of the true host, yet a close observer would have noted how often he cast admiring glances at Isabel. She was so dainty, so beautifully gowned, and elaborately coiffured, that Romeo compared her with his sister greatly to the disadvantage of the latter. Juliet's hair was unruly and broke into curls all around her face. Isabel's was in perfect order, with every wave mathematically exact. Juliet's face was tanned and rosy, Isabel's pale and cool. Juliet's hands were rough and her fingertips square. Isabel's were white and tapering, with perfectly manicured nails. And their gowns, there was no possible comparison there. Both were in white, but Romeo discovered that there might be a vast difference in white gowns. Afterward, the guests were taken out into the yard and led to the comprehensive grave of the 19 dogs. Minerva kept at a safe distance, but the 5 puppies gamboled and frolicked, even to the verge of the sepulchre. Romeo desired to send a dog to Allison, and generously offered Isabel her choice, but she refused. "I'll take the pup," said the doctor. "It might amuse him, and anyhow, he'd like to know that you thought of him." Isabel had strolled down toward the barn. Juliet hesitated, duty bidding her follow Isabel and inclination holding her back. Presently Isabel returned, and her face was surprisingly animated. "Is that our car in the barn?" she asked. Her manner betrayed great excitement. "Why, it's Allison Kent's car, isn't it?" inquired Romeo. "I thought it was mine. Colonel Kent gave it to me for a wedding present." "I thought you couldn't keep the wedding presents unless the wedding came off," Juliet observed practically. "I've still got my ring," said Isabel. "Allison said he wanted me to keep it. And he gave me his violin, too. I should think he'd want me to keep the car." "Better make sure," suggested Dr. Jack politely. "People don't scatter automobiles around carelessly among their friends as a general rule," observed Juliet. "I wish I could get it up to Kent's," Romeo said thoughtfully. "It always reminds me here." "I'd just as soon drive it back," the doctor answered. "It's more of a trot out here than I supposed it was." "Why, yes," cried Juliet. "You can drive it back tonight and take Isabel home." "Charmed," lied the doctor, with an awkward bow. So it happened that Isabel once more climbed into the red car and went back over the fateful road. The machine ran well, but it seemed to require the driver's entire attention, for his conversation consisted of brief remarks to which answers even more brief were vouchsafed. When he turned on the wide road in front of Madame Bernard's, after leaving Isabel at the gate, she lingered in the shadow, watching until he was out of sight. The throb of the engine became fainter and fainter, then died away altogether. Isabel sighed and went in, wondering if Allison, after giving her the ring and the violin, would not also want her to have the car, or, if that seemed too much, and she should send back the violin. She pondered over it until almost dawn, then went to sleep. The following afternoon, while Madame Bernard slept, Isabel sat idly in the living room, looking out of the window, though, as she told herself fretfully, there was not much use of looking out of the window when nobody ever went by. But no sooner had she phrased the thought than she heard the faint chug-chug of an approaching motor. She moved back into the shelter of the curtain, and presently saw the big red automobile whiz by. Dr. Jack, hatless and laughing, was at the wheel. Beside him was Colonel Kent. Had they gone out and left Allison alone? Surely, since there was no one else. Fortune favored her if she wished to see him. But did she dare? Isabel was nothing if not courageous. Arming herself with an excuse in the shape of the violin, she sallied forth and made her way to Kent's, meeting no one upon the well-worn path. As it happened, Allison was on the lower veranda, walking back and forth, persistently accompanied by the Crosby pup. Assisted by the Colonel and Dr. Jack, he had come down without accident, and had promised to go out in the car with them a little later. When he saw Isabel coming up the walk, he stopped in astonishment. He did not go to meet her, but offered her a chair and said with formal politeness, "How do you do? This is an unexpected pleasure." "I brought this," began Isabel, offering him the violin. He took it with a smile. "Thank you. I don't know that I shall ever use it again, but I am glad to have it." There was a pause, and Isabel moved restlessly in her chair. Then she slipped the ring from her finger. "Do you want this now?" she asked. Her face was a shade paler. Allison laughed. "Indeed I don't. Whom could I give it to?" "Rose," suggested Isabel maliciously. Allison sighed and turned his face away. "She wouldn't take it," he said sadly. Isabel slipped it back on her finger, evidently relieved. "I'm glad you're better," she went on, clearing her throat. "Thank you. So am I." "I saw your father out in the car. The doctor was with him." "Yes, they're coming back for me in a little while." "It's a lovely car. The doctor brought me home in it last night from Crosby's." "He told me." Allison did not see fit to say just how much Dr. Jack had told him. He smiled a little at the recollection of the young man's remorseful confession. I told them, continued Isabel, that I thought it was mine, that your father had given it to me, but it seems I was mistaken. It seems so, Allison agreed. Dad gave it to the doctor this morning. Isabel repressed a bitter cry of astonishment. For keeps? Yes, for keeps. It's little enough to give him after all he's done for me. We both wanted him to have it. You could get another, couldn't you? I suppose so, if I wanted it. People can usually get things they want, if they are intangible. I wanted to tell you, resumed Isabel, that I was sorry I acted the way I did the last time I was here. Don't think of it, replied Allison kindly. It was very natural. It was all a great shock to me, and I was lame, and I wish everything could be as it was before, she concluded with a faint flush creeping into her face. That is the great tragedy of life, Isabel, that things can never be as they were before. Sometimes they're worse, sometimes better, but the world is never the same. Of course, she answered, without grasping his meaning. But you're going to be all right again now, and that's the same. Allison shrugged his shoulders and bit his lips to conceal a smile. It may be the same for me, but it couldn't be for you. I couldn't give you any guarantee that it wouldn't happen again, you know. I might be run over by a railroad train or a trolley car, or any one of 1,000 things might happen to me. There's always a risk. Tears filled Isabel's eyes. I don't believe you ever cared very much for me, she said, her lips quivering. I did, Isabel, he answered kindly, but it's gone now. Even at that, it lasted longer than you cared for me. Come, let's be friends. He offered his hand. She put hers into it for a moment, then quickly took it away. He noted that it was very cold. I must be going, she said, keeping her self-control with difficulty. Aunt Francesca will miss me. Thank you for coming, and thank you for bringing the violin. You're welcome. Goodbye. Goodbye, Silver Girl. I hope you'll be happy. Isabel did not answer, nor turn back. She went out of the gate and out of his life, pride keeping her head high until she had turned the corner. Then, very sorry for herself, she sat down and wept. End of chapter 22. Chapter 23 of Old Rose and Silver. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Old Rose and Silver by Myrtle Reed. Chapter 23. Tears, Idle Tears.
Say, Jewel, inquired Romeo casually, why is it that you don't look like a lady? What do you mean? Demanded Juliet, bristling. I don't know just what I mean, but you seem so different from everybody else. I'm clean, ain't I? Yes, he admitted grudgingly. And my hair is combed? Sometimes. And my white dress is clean, isn't it? Yes, but it doesn't look like hers, you know. Her? Who's her? You know, Isabel. Juliet sighed and bit her lips. Her eyes filled with tears, and she winked very hard to keep them back. An ominous pain clutched at her loyal little heart. What do you want me to do, Romy? She asked gently. Why, I don't know. Men never know about such things. Just make yourself like her, that's all. Huh? Juliet was scornful now. I don't know whether I want to look like her or not, she remarked coldly. Why not? He flashed back. And I don't want to be like her either. She can't do anything. She can't cook or swing on the trapeze or skate or fish or row or swim or climb a tree or ride horseback or walk or anything. I could teach her, mused Romeo, half to himself. I taught you. Yes, cried Juliet, swallowing the persistent lump in her throat. And now you've done it, you're ashamed of me. I didn't say so, he temporized. You didn't have to. You don't suppose I can see? Don't get so mad about it. She was laughing at you last night. And so was the doctor. They didn't think it was nice for you to put on your knickers and swing on the trapeze. Ladies don't do that. You taught me, she reminded him quickly. Yes, but I didn't ask you to do it before everybody. You started it yourself. Isabel wouldn't look at you, and you remember what the doctor said, don't you? He told you to cut it out. That was because he thought it was dangerous.
'Tisn't dangerous, and he knows it. He knew it wasn't refined and ladylike for you to do that before men." "It was only a doctor," Juliet replied in a small, thin voice. "They're different from other people. I wouldn't let the Kents see me in my knickers, and you know it. You would, too, if you wanted to. You're a perfect tomboy. You wouldn't see Isabel doing that." "Probably not," answered Juliet dryly. "She's no more likely to do that than I would be to go back on the man I'd promised to marry just because his hand was hurt." "You'll never have a chance to go back on anybody, so you don't know what you'd do." "Why won't I?" "Because," answered Romeo, choosing his words carefully, "when a man gets married, he wants to marry a lady, not a tomboy." For some unknown reason, he resented any slur cast at Isabel. "And," replied Juliet cuttingly, "when a lady gets married, she wants to marry a gentleman." The accent carried insult with it, and Romeo left the house, slamming the door and whistling defiantly until he was out of hearing. There was no longer any need for Juliet to keep back the tears. Stretched at full length upon the disemboweled sofa, she buried her face in the pillow and wept until she could weep no more. Then she bathed her face and pinned up her tangled hair, and went to the one long mirror the Crosby mansion boasted of, to take an inventory of herself. She could see that Romeo was right. She didn't look like a lady. Her skirt was too short and didn't hang evenly, and her belt was wrong because she had no corsets. Juliet made a wry face at the thought of a corset. None of her clothes fitted like Isabel's. Her face was tanned, her hands rough and red, and her nails impossible. "I look just like a boy," Juliet admitted to herself, "dressed up in girl's clothes. If Romie's hair was long and he had on this dress, he'd look just like me." Pride forbade her to go to Isabel and inquire into the mysteries of her all-pervading femininity. Anyhow, Isabel would laugh at her. Anybody would laugh at her, unless Miss Bernard. But she had gone away. She was a lady, even more than Isabel, and so was the little old lady everybody called Aunt Francesca. If she could see Aunt Francesca, she wouldn't be ashamed to tell her what Romeo had said. If she only knew what to do, she could do it, for she had plenty of money. Juliet dimly discerned that money was very necessary if one would be the same sort of lady that the others were. "If Mamma hadn't died," said Juliet to herself, "I guess I'd have been as much of a lady as anybody, and nobody would have dared call me a tomboy." Her heart ached for the gentle little mother who had died many years ago. "She would have known," sighed Juliet. "Mamma was a lady if anybody ever was, and she didn't have the money we've got either." The life of the Crosbys had been bare of luxuries and sometimes even of comforts, until the considerate uncle died and left his money to the twins. As fortunes go, it was not much, but it seemed inexhaustible to them because they did not know how to spend it. "I'll go this very day," thought Juliet, "and see Aunt Francesca. I'll ask her. If Isabel is there, I'll have to wait, but if I don't ask for Isabel, maybe I won't see her." Having decided upon a plan of action, the way seemed easier, so Juliet went about her daily duties with a lighter heart, and even sang after a fashion, as she awkwardly pressed the wrinkles from her white muslin gown. Though it was September, it was still warm enough to wear it. Romeo, having only the day before attained his maturity, had taken unto himself the masculine privilege of getting angry at some one else for what he himself had done. He was furious with Juliet, though he did not trouble himself to ask why. "The idea," he muttered, "of her criticizing Isabel." His wounded sensibilities impelled him to walk past the Bernard house, very slowly, 2 or 3 times, but there was no one in sight. He went to the post office as a mere matter of habit. There was seldom any mail for the Crosbys except on the 1st of the month, when the lawyer's formal note, enclosing remittance, came duly to hand. Nobody seemed to be around. There was nothing to do. It would have been natural to go back home, but he was too angry for that, and inwardly vowed to stay away long enough to bring Juliet to her senses. He recalled the night he had called upon Isabel and had not reached home until late. He remembered the torrent of tears in Juliet's cry, "Oh, Romie, Romie, I don't care where you've been as long as I've got you back." It pleased his masculine sense of superiority to know that he had power over a woman's tears, to make them come or go as he chose. He sauntered slowly toward Kent's, thinking that he might while away an hour or two there. It was a long time until midnight, and there seemed to be nothing to do but to sit and wait. He could ask about the car, and whether it was all right now. If Dr. Jack could run it, maybe they could go out together for a little spin. It would be nice to go by his own house, and never even turn his head. And if they could get Isabel to go, too, it would teach Juliet a much-needed lesson. He had nearly reached his destination when he came upon the picture of beauty in distress. Isabel sat at the roadside, leaning against a tree, sobbing. Romeo gave a long, low whistle of astonishment. "Say," he called cheerfully, "what's wrong?" Isabel looked up, wiped her eyes, and began to weep more earnestly. Though Juliet's tears had moved him to anger and disdain, Isabel's grief roused all his chivalry. He sat down beside her and tried to take her handkerchief away from her eyes. "Don't," he said softly. "What's the matter?" "Oh," sobbed Isabel, "I'm the most miserable girl in the whole world. Nobody wants me." "What makes you say that?" demanded Romeo. "Look here, if you'll tell me who's been making you cry, I'll—" He did not finish the sentence, but his tone indicated that dire misfortune would be visited upon the luckless individual directly responsible for Isabel's tears. "You know," began Isabel after her sobs had quieted somewhat, "I was engaged to Allison Kent until you ran over us. At first, I couldn't go over. I was so bruised and lame, and before I was well enough to go, I got a note from him, releasing me from the engagement." "Yes?" queried Romeo, encouragingly. "Go on." "Well, I didn't think I ought to go over, under the circumstances, but Aunt Francesca made me go. She's been mean to me, too, so I went, and he was horrid to me, perfectly horrid. I offered him his ring, and he almost threw his violin at me, and told me to keep that, too. I was afraid of him. Well, since that, everything has been awful. I wrote to Mamma and told her about it, and that I couldn't stay here any longer, and she didn't answer for a long time. Then she said I would have to stay where I was until she could make new arrangements for me, and that she was glad I wasn't going to marry a cripple. She said something about the survival of the unfit, but I didn't understand it. And then last night, when I heard that Allison wasn't going to lose his hand after all, I thought I ought to take his violin back to him and try to make up, you know. So I've just been there. He took the violin all right, but he didn't seem to want me. He said nothing could ever be as it was before. I was ready to get married and go away. I'd do almost anything for a change. But he actually seemed to be glad to get rid of me, and they've given my automobile that Colonel Kent himself gave to me for a wedding present to that doctor who was out to your house last night. Oh," sobbed Isabel, "I wish I was dead. If you only hadn't run over us, everything would have been all right." Romeo's young face was set in stern and unaccustomed lines. He, then, was directly responsible for Isabel's tears. He had run over them and hurt Isabel and made everything wrong for her, and because she was a lady, she wasn't blaming him in the least. She had merely pointed out to him, as gently as she could, what he had done to her. A bright idea flashed into his mind, as he remembered that he was 21 now, and could do as he pleased without consulting anybody. He reached into his pocket, drew out a handful of greenbacks and silver, even a gold piece or two. It would serve Juliet just right and make up to Isabel for what he had done. "I say, Isabel," he began awkwardly, "would you be willing to marry me?" Isabel quickly dried her tears. "Why, I don't know," she answered, much astonished. Then the practical side of her nature asserted itself. "Have you got money enough?" Romeo tendered the handful of currency. "All this and plenty more in the bank." "I know, but it was the bank I was talking about. Have you got enough for us to live in a nice hotel and go to the theatre every night?" "More than that," Romeo asserted confidently. "I've got loads." "I don't know," said Isabel half to herself. "It would serve them all right. Allison used to be jealous of you," she added with a sidelong glance that set his youthful heart to fluttering. "Juliet is jealous of you," Romeo responded disloyally. "We had an awful scrap this morning because I asked her why she didn't try to be a lady like you." "Of course," replied Isabel, smoothing her gown with a dainty hand. "I've always liked Juliet, but I liked you better." "Really, Isabel? Did you always like me?" "Always." "Then come on, let's skip out now, the way they do in the books. Let's take the next train." Why not get married here, objected Isabel practically, and take the 4:30 into town? There's a minister here, and while you're seeing about it, I can go home and get my coat. All right, but don't stop for anything else. We've got to hustle. Don't tell anybody. Not even Aunt Francesca? No, she'd make a fuss, and besides, she doesn't deserve it if she's been mean to you. Romeo leaned over and bestowed a meaningless peck upon the fair cheek of his betrothed. I'll never be mean to you, he said. I know you won't, Isabel returned trustfully. Then she laughed as she rose to her feet. It will be a good joke on Allison, she said gleefully. It'll be a good joke on everybody, Romeo agreed happily. Listen, said Isabel. A faint chug-chug was heard in the distance, gradually coming nearer. It's my car. I wish you hadn't been so quick to get rid of it last night. We could have gone away in it now. Never mind, I'll buy you another. They hoped to reach the turn in the road before the car got there, but failed. Dr. Jack came to a dead stop. Want a lift? He asked. No, thank you, said Romeo. No, thank you, repeated Isabel primly. Colonel Kent had greeted her with the most chilling politeness, and she burned to get away. Say, resumed Romeo, will you do something for me? Sure, replied the doctor cordially. Anything. Will you take a note out to my sister for me? I shan't get back for some time. You bet. Where is it? I haven't written it yet. Just wait a minute. Romeo tore a leaf from an old memorandum book which he carried, and wrote rapidly. Dear Jewel, Isabel and I have gone away to get married. You can have half of everything. I'll let you know where to send my clothes. R.C. He was tempted to add an apology for what he had said earlier in the day, but his newly acquired importance made him refrain from anything so compromising. He folded the note into a little cocked hat and addressed it. Much obliged, he said laconically. So long. So long, returned Dr. Jack, starting the engine. Good-bye, said the Colonel, lifting his hat. Romeo left Isabel at Madame Bernard's gate. Hurry up, he said, in a low tone. I'll meet you under the big elm down the road. All right, she whispered. Madame Bernard was asleep. So Isabel hastily crammed a few things into a suitcase and slipped out of the house, unseen and unheard. As the half-starved minister of the country parish was sorely in need of the generous fee Romeo pressed upon him in advance, the arrangements were pitifully easy. He was at the trysting place fully 10 minutes before she came in sight, staggering under the unaccustomed burden of a heavy suitcase. It might not have occurred to him to relieve Juliet of a cumbrous piece of baggage, but he instinctively took it from Isabel. Come on, he said. We've got to hurry if we don't want to miss the 4:30. How long does it take to get married? Queried Isabel. Not long, I guess. See how people fool around over it? And we're getting through with it in one afternoon. We're making a record, I guess. It seemed that they were, for when they came to the shabby little brown house near the big white church, the minister, his wife, and a next-door neighbor were waiting. In a very short time the ceremony was over, and Mr. and Mrs. Romeo Crosby were on the train, speeding toward their honeymoon and the lively years that undoubtedly lay ahead of them. Allison had changed his mind about going out that afternoon, but promised to go next time. Colonel Kent remained at home, and Dr. Jack sped away alone upon his errand. When he reached Crosby's, Juliet, clad in her best, was just leaving the house. She was outwardly cheerful, but her face still bore traces of tears. Where were you going? asked the doctor, as Juliet greeted him. There was a new shyness in her manner, as of some unwonted restraint. I was going into town. I wanted to see Aunt Francesca. She slipped easily into the habit of the other's seldom hearing the name Madame Bernard. I'll take you. Here's a note from your brother. Juliet opened it, read the fateful message, and turned white as death. What is it? asked the doctor, much alarmed. In answer, she offered him the note, her hand shaking pitifully. The doctor read it twice before he grasped the full meaning of it. Well, I'll be, he said, half to himself. Unable to stand, Juliet sat down upon the well-worn doorstep, and he sat down beside her. It's all my fault, she said solemnly. Romy told me this morning that I wasn't a lady, and he wanted me to be like her. He said I was a tomboy, and I told him that if I was, he'd done it himself. And he got mad and went away, and now— Juliet burst into tears, but she had no handkerchief. So Dr. Jack gave her his. "Tears, idle tears," he quoted lightly. "I say, kid, don't take it so hard." I'm not a lady," she sobbed. "You are," he assured her. "You're the finest lady I know." Don't," she sobbed. "Don't make fun of me. Romy said that you were laughing at me yesterday because I was a tomboy." "Kid," he said softly, almost unmanned by a sudden tenderness quite foreign to his experience. "Oh, my dear little girl, won't you look at me?" The tone was wholly new to Juliet. She did not know that any man could be so tender, so beautifully kind. "It's because he's a doctor," she thought. "He's used to seeing people when they don't feel right." "I'm so sorry," he was saying. "Your brother didn't mean anything by it, little girl. He was just teasing." "He wasn't," returned Juliet, wiping her eyes. "Don't you think I know when he's teasing and when he isn't? I'm not a lady. I'm only a tomboy. And now he's gone away with her and left me all alone." "You'll never be alone if I can help it," he assured her fervently. "Look here. Do you suppose you could ever learn to like me?" "Why, I like you now. I've always liked you." "I know, but I don't mean like that. Do you think you could ever like me a whole lot? Enough to marry me, I mean?" "Why, I don't know. I never thought—" Juliet's voice trailed off into an inarticulate murmur of astonishment. "Won't you try?" he pleaded. "Oh, Juliet, I've loved you ever since I first saw you." The high color surged into her face. He was not joking. He meant every word. Even Juliet could see that. "Won't you try, dear? That's all I ask for now." "Why, yes," she said, her wide blue eyes fixed upon his. "I'd try almost anything for you, but I'm only a tomboy." Dr. Jack caught her cold little hands in his. "Kiss me," he said huskily. Juliet's face burned, but she lifted her lips to his, obediently and simply as a child. The man hesitated for an instant, then pushed her away from him, not unkindly, but firmly. "No, I won't take it, Princess," he said in a strange voice. "I'll wait until you wake up." "I'm not asleep," she stammered. "You are in some ways." Then he added, irrelevantly, "Thank God." "I don't know," remarked Juliet at the end of an uncomfortable pause, "what to do with myself. I don't want to stay here alone, and I wouldn't go anywhere near them, not for the world." "Where did you say you were going when I came?" "To Aunt Francesca's, Madame Bernard, you know." "Good business," he answered, nodding vigorous approval. "Come on. She seems to be the unfailing refuge of the shipwrecked mariner in this district. If I'm not much mistaken, she'll take you into her big house and her bigger heart."
"Oh," said Juliet wistfully. "Do you think she would take me and make me into a lady?"
"I think she'll take you," he responded after a brief struggle with himself. "But I don't want you made over. I want you to stay just exactly as you are." "Oh, you dear little kid," he muttered. "You'll try to care, won't you?"
"I'll try," she promised sweetly as she climbed into the big red machine. "I didn't think I'd ever be in this car."
"You can come whenever you like. It's mine now." Juliet did not seem to hear. The car hummed along the dusty road, making a soothing, purring noise. Pensively, she looked across the distant fields, whence came the hum and whir of reaping. There was a far-away look in her face that the man beside her was powerless to understand. She was making swift readjustments, as best she might, and wisely he left her to herself. As they approached Madame Bernard's, Juliet turned to him. "I was just thinking," she sighed, "how quickly you grow up after you get to be 21." He made no answer. He swallowed hard and turned the car into the driveway. Aunt Francesca came out on the veranda, followed by Mr. Boffin, as Juliet jumped out of the car. She had the crumpled note in her cold little hand. Without a word, she offered it to Madame Bernard and waited. The beautiful face instantly became soft with pity. "My dear child," she breathed. "My dear little motherless child." Juliet went into her open arms as straight as a homing pigeon to its nest. "Oh, Aunt Francesca," she sobbed, "will you take me and make a lady out of me?" "You're already a lady," laughed the older woman amid her tears. "Come in, Juliet dear. Come home." End of chapter 23. Chapter 24 of Old Rose and Silver. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Old Rose and Silver by Myrtle Reed. Chapter 24. The House Where Love Lived. It was past the middle of October, and Allison's injured hand was not only free of its bandages, but he had partially regained the use of it. Dr. Jack still lingered, eagerly seizing every excuse that presented itself. "I suppose I ought to be back looking for another job," he regretfully observed to Allison, "but I like it here. And besides, I want to hear you play on your fiddle before I go." Allison laughed and hospitably urged him to stay as long as he chose. Colonel Kent added heartily, after an old Southern fashion, "My house is yours." Crimson and golden leaves rained from the maples, and the purple winds of autumn swept them into drifts at the roadside. Amethystine haze shimmered in the valleys and lay cloud-like upon the distant hills. Through the long aisles of trees a fairy patter of tiny furred feet rustled back and forth upon the fallen leaves. Only a dropping nut or a busy squirrel broke the exquisite peace of the forest, where the myriad life of the woods waited in hushed expectancy for the tide of the year to turn. Like a scarlet shuttle plying through the web of autumn, the big red touring car hummed and whirred, with a happy young man at the wheel and a laughing girl beside him. Juliet's momentary self-consciousness was gone, and she was her sunny self again, though she still occasionally wept in secret, longing for her brother. "Aunt Francesca," she said one day when the two were sewing on dainty garments destined to adorn Juliet, "do you think Romie will ever come back to me?" "Not in the sense you mean, dear," replied Madame gently. "We live in a world of change, and things are never the same, even from day to day. She made him think I was a tomboy, and now she'll teach him not to love me. Why does she want everything?" "Some women do, when they marry. Many are not content to be sweetheart and wife, but must take the place of mother and sisters too. But remember, Juliet, when a woman closes a man's heart against those of his own blood, the one door she has left open will some day be slammed in her own face." "And then?" "Then the other doors will swing ajar, turning slowly on rusty hinges, but the women for whom they are opened will never cross the threshold again." "Why?" "Because they have ceased to care. There is nothing so dead as a woman's dead love. When the fire goes out, and no single ember is left, the ashes are past the power of flame to rekindle." "Do you think that after a while I won't care for Romie any more?" "Not as you used to. That is impossible even now." Juliet sighed and hastily wiped away a tear. With a quick, sure stroke her life seemed to have been divided. "Don't, dear. Remember what you have had. I often think a woman has crossed the line between youth and maturity when she begins to put away, in the lavender of memory, the lovely things she has had and is never to have again. The after years are made up, so many times, of things one has had rounded off and put away forever." "I know," returned Juliet, with a faraway look in her eyes. "I remember the day I grew up, almost the hour. It was the day I came here." Madame stooped to kiss the girl's rosy cheek, then swiftly turned the talk to linen and lace. Always quick to observe, Juliet had acquired little graces of tone and manner, softened her abruptness, and, guided by loving tact, had begun to bloom like a primrose in a sunny window. "When Miss Bernard comes back," asked Juliet wistfully, "shall I have to go?" "No, dear, indeed no. This is your home until the right man comes a-wooing and takes you to a little house of your own." Scarlet signals flamed in Juliet's cheeks as she earnestly devoted herself to her sewing, and Madame smiled. Already, in quiet moments, she had planned a pretty wedding gown for Juliet, and a still prettier wedding. Allison came frequently, sometimes alone, and sometimes with his father or Dr. Jack. He had remarked once that when he desired to consult his physician, he always knew where to find him. Madame affected not to notice that a strange young man had become a veritable part of her family, for she liked Dr. Jack and made him very welcome, morning, noon, and night. On Wednesdays, the men of the other household dined with her, Saturdays she and Juliet were honored guests at the Colonel's, though he deprecated his own hospitality. "A house needs a woman at the head of it," he said. "It was different when Miss Rose was here." Indeed it was, thought Allison, though he did not put it into words. At the end of the month, when it was cool enough to make an open fire seem the most cheerful of companions, Madame had them all at her own table. Juliet was surpassingly lovely in her first long gown of ivory-tinted chiffon, ornamented only by hand embroidery and a bit of deep-toned lace. Her wavy hair was gathered into a loose knot from which tiny tendrils escaped to cling about her face. Madame had put a pink rose into her hair, slipped another into her belt, and had been well pleased with the work of her own hands. After dinner, while Juliet played piquet with the Colonel, and Dr. Jack sat quietly in the shadow, where he could watch every play of light and shade upon the girl's lovely changing face, Allison drew Madame into the library and quietly closed the door. "Aunt Francesca," he said without preliminary, "I've been more kinds of a fool in a few months than most men can manage to be in a lifetime." "Yes," Madame agreed, with a cool little smile. "Where is Rose?" he demanded. "Rose," replied Madame lightly, "has gone away." "I know that," he flashed back. "I realize it every day and every hour of my life. I asked where she was." "And I," answered Madame, imperturbably, "have told you. She is simply away." "Is she well?" "Yes." "Is she happy?" "Of course. Why not? Beauty, health, talent, sufficient income, love, what more can a woman desire?" "Aunt Francesca, tell me, please, where is Rose?" "When I was married," answered Madame, idly fingering an ivory paper knife, "I went to live in a little house in the woods." "Yes. Where is Rose?" "It was only a tiny place, but a brook sang in front of it night and day." "Must have been pretty. Where did Rose go?" "It was very quiet there. It would have been a good place to work, if either of us had been musical, or anything of that sort." "Charming," replied Allison, absently. "It wasn't far from town, either. We could take a train at 2 o'clock and reach Holly Springs a little after 3. It was half a mile up the main road from the station, and as we had no horse, we always walked." "Nice walk," said Allison dejectedly. "I have never been back since I was left alone. Sometimes I have thought my little house ought to have some one to look after it. A house gets lonely, too, with no one to care for it." "I suppose so. Is Rose coming back?" "I have often thought of the little summer cottages, huddled together like frightened children, when the life and laughter had gone and winter was swiftly approaching. How cold their walls must be, and how empty the heart of a little house when there is no fire there. So like a woman when love has gone out of her life." Allison sighed and began to sharpen his pencil. Madame observed that his hands were trembling. "I see," he said. "I don't deserve to know where she is, and Rose doesn't want me chasing after her. Never mind. I had it coming to me, I guess. What a hopeless idiot I've been." "Yes," agreed Madame cordially. "Carlyle says that there is no other entirely fatal person." Something in her tone gave him courage for another question. "Once for all, Aunt Francesca, will you tell me where Rose is?" "George Washington was a great man," Madame observed. "He never told a lie. If he had promised not to tell anything, he never told it." Then she added with swift irrelevance, "This used to be a very pleasant time of the year at Holly Springs." A great light broke in upon Allison. "Aunt Francesca!" he cried. He put his arms around her, lifted her from her chair, and nearly smothered her in a bear-like embrace. "God bless you!" "He has," murmured Madame, disengaging herself. "My foster son has been a dunce, but his reason is now restored." The 2 o'clock train for Holly Springs did not leave town until 3, so Allison waited for an hour in the station, fuming with impatience. Both Colonel Kent and the doctor had offered to accompany him, individually or together, but he had brusquely put them aside. "Don't worry," he said. "My name and address are in my pocket, and also inside my hat. I'll check my grip and be tenderly considerate of my left hand. Good-bye." When he had gone, Colonel Kent anxiously turned to the doctor. "Where do you suppose, and why?" "Cherchez la femme," returned the doctor. "What makes you think so? It's not." "It's about the only errand a man can go on, and not be willing to take another chap along. And I'll bet anything I've got, except my girl and my buzz cart, that it isn't the fair, false one we met at the hour of her elopement." "Must be Rose, then," said the Colonel, half to himself. "But I thought nobody knew where she was." "Love will find a way," hummed Dr. Jack. "I suppose you don't care to go for a ride this afternoon?" "Not I," laughed the Colonel. "Why don't you take Juliet?" "All right, since you ask me to. I wonder," he continued to himself as he went toward Madame Bernard's at the highest rate of speed, "just how a fellow would go to work to find a woman who had left no address. Sixth sense, I suppose, or perhaps seventh or eighth." Yet Allison was doing very well, with only the 5 senses of the normal human being to aid him in his search. He left the train at the sleepy little place known as Holly Springs, and walked up the main road as though he knew the way. "Half a mile," he said to himself, "and a little brown house in the woods with a brook singing in front of it. Ought to get to it pretty soon." The prattling brook was half asleep in its narrow channel, but the gentle murmur was audible to one who stopped in the road to listen. It did not cross the road, but turned away, frightened, from the dusty highway of a modest civilization, and went back into the woods, where it met another brook, and traveled to the river in company. The house, just back of the singing stream, was a little place, as Madame Bernard had said, but, though he rapped repeatedly, no one answered, so he lifted the latch and cautiously stepped in. A grand piano, unblushingly new, and evidently of recent importation from the city, occupied most of the tiny living room. The embers of a wood fire lay on the hearth, and the room was faintly scented with the sweet smoke of hard pine. A well-known and well-worn sonata was on the music rack. A volume of Chopin had fallen to the floor. Allison picked it up and put it in its place. On the piano was some of his own music, stamped with his Berlin address. A familiar hat, trimmed with crushed roses, lay on the window-seat. The faint, indefinable scent of attar of roses was dimly to be discerned, as a sort of background for the fragrant smoke. An open book lay face downward on the table. A bit of dainty needlework was thrown carelessly across the chair. An envelope addressed to Madame Francesca Bernard was on the old-fashioned writing desk, and a single page of rose-stamped paper lay near it, bearing, in a familiar hand, "My dearest." The 2 words filled Allison with panic. Not knowing how Rose was wont to address the little old lady they both loved, he conjured up the forbidding spectre of "the other man" that had haunted him for weeks past. Sighing, he sat down at the piano and began to drum idly with one hand. "Wonder if I could use the other," he thought. "Pretty stiff, I guess." He began to play from memory, and outside a woman paused, almost at the threshold, with her hands upon her heart. In a sudden throb of pain the old days came back. She saw herself at the piano, aching with love and longing, while just beyond, in an old moonlit garden, Allison made love to Isabel. Was it a ghost? Or was it? No, she was only foolish. Aunt Francesca had promised not to tell, and she never broke her word. Besides, why should he seek her? "It's only someone who has stopped in passing," Rose thought, "to ask the way to the next town, or to get a glass of water, or I won't be foolish. I'll go in." So she crossed the threshold into the house where love lived. At the sound of her step, the man turned quickly, the music ending in a broken chord. "You!" she gasped. "How could you come?" "By train," answered Allison gently, "and then by walking. I've frightened you, Rose." "No," she stammered, sinking into a chair. I'm surprised, of course. I'm glad you're well enough to be about again. Is anything wrong with Aunt Francesca?" she asked anxiously. "Indeed there isn't. She was blooming like a lilac bush in May, when I saw her last night." Did she tell you?" "She did not," he returned concisely. "Then how—" "I just came. What made you think you could get away from me?" "I wasn't getting away," she returned with difficulty. "I was just tired, and I came here to rest and to work," she concluded lamely. "You didn't need me." "Not need you?" he cried, stretching his trembling hands toward her. "Oh, Rose, I need you always." Slowly the color ebbed from her face, leaving her white to the lips. "Don't," she said pitifully. "Oh, I know," he flashed back bitterly. "I've lost any shadow of right I might ever have had, because I was a blind fool, and I never had any chance anyway. All I can do is to go on loving you, needing you, wanting you, seeing your face before me every hour of the day and night, thirsting for you with every fibre of me. All I have to keep is an empty husk of memory, those few weeks you were kind to me. At least I had you with me, though your heart belonged to someone else." "Someone else?" she repeated curiously. The color was coming back slowly now. "Yes. Have you forgotten you told me? That day, don't you remember? You said you had loved another man who did not care for you." Rose nodded. Her face was like a crimson flower swaying on a slender stem. "I said," she began, "that I had loved a man who did not care for me, and that I always would. Wasn't that it?" "Something like that. I wish to God I could change places with him." "Did I?" hesitated Rose. "Are you sure that I said another man, or was it just a man?" "Rose, what do you mean?" Covered with lovely confusion, she stumbled over to the window, where she might hide her burning face from him. "Don't you think," she asked unsteadily, "that it is beautiful here? This is Aunt Francesca's little house, where she came when she was first married. She always calls it the little house where love lived. And I came here," she went on courageously, "because in a house where love had lived, I thought there might be some for—" Her voice trailed off into an indistinct murmur. "Rose," cried Allison, "couldn't you give me just what I had before? Couldn't we go back and never mind the other man?" "There's never any going back," she answered in a whisper. Her heart was beating wildly because he was so near. "And did I say, are you sure I said another man?" "Rose, Rose, look at me! Tell me for God's sake who he was, or is. I can't bear it." She turned toward him. "Look," she said softly. "Look in my face and see." For a tense instant he hesitated. Then, with a little cry of joy, he clasped her close forever, having seen his own face mirrored in her happy eyes. The End. The end of chapter 24, and the end of Old Rose and Silver by Myrtle Reed. Read by Darrell War.